Chapter 33-24. A day's slave. The myriad sword mountain. This name shocked Nyetian inexplicably. Sword shadows hung upside down in the air like mountains, giving off a majestic and surging aura. However, Nyetian didn't understand how the sword shadows were formed. It was as if there was a close connection between the sword shadows and the mountains below them. Nyetian, do you know about spiritual veins? Nie Fenghua noticed Nyetian's confusion and asked with a faint smile. Yes. Nyetian nodded. Of course he knew about spiritual energy earth veins. They were earth veins formed by the spiritual energy that was nurtured by heaven and earth, and contained enormous amounts of spiritual energy. However, spiritual veins were things of planes, so realms wouldn't care about them. Spiritual veins are nurtured by heaven and earth. The myriad sword mountain is also nurtured by heaven and earth. Nie Fenghua solemnly nodded and said, It's just that the spiritual chi earth vein contains an enormous amount of spiritual chi of heaven and earth, while the myriad layers sword mountain contains an enormous sword intent. Upon hearing Nie Fenghua's words, Nyetian's eyes couldn't help but tremble as he exclaimed, Sword intent born from heaven and earth. He never thought that heaven and earth could nurture sword intent. Yes. Nie Fenghua glanced at Nyetian and nodded. You can think of the myriad sword mountain as a heaven and earth sword vein, just like a heaven and earth sacred vein. Heaven and earth sacred vein. Heaven and earth sword vein. Nyetian's eyes flickered. The shock in his heart was indescribable. It turned out that the myriad sword mountain was a sword vein nurtured by heaven and earth, just like a heaven and earth sacred vein. He had seen a heaven and earth sacred vein not long ago in the Tianqing realm. The difference was that a heaven and earth sacred vein contained sacred energy, while a heaven and earth sword vein contained sword intent. Thinking about it, the existence of the myriad sword mountain wasn't strange at all. Many cultivators had Xiantian sword veins in their bodies that were nurtured by heaven and earth. Moreover, if a Xiantian sacred array and a Xiantian martial vein existed, then the myriad sword mountain would also exist. Nyetian, the sword shadow you see is formed by the sword shadow in the sword mountain below. After a while, after waiting for Nyetian to calm down a little, Nie Fenghua continued, The sword mountain contains an enormous sword intent. The bigger the sword shadow, the more sword intent there is in the mountain range. So that's how it is. Nyetian's eyes trembled as he understood. He had long discovered that every sword shadow in the void was different in size, and their sword intent and aura were also different. The sword shadow in the air was like a projection of the sword intent in the sword mountain, representing how much sword intent was contained in the mountain. Father, those sword shadows are very big, but the sword intent aura is very weak. What's going on? At this moment, Nie Feng discovered that something was wrong and asked curiously. Some of the sword shadows were huge, but the sword intent aura was very weak, which was strange. That's a sword mountain that has been mined by a swordsman. Of course, the sword intent is weak. Nie Fenghua laughed bitterly, his expression somewhat ugly. Mined. Nyetian was stunned for a moment. He didn't quite understand what Nie Fenghua meant. Nyetian, do you know why the Sky Guardians gathered so many genius swordsmen into the sword marshals in the sky? Nie Fenghua's lips twitched as he asked with a bitter smile. I don't know. Nyetian furrowed his brows and shook his head. Actually, we're here to be sword slaves. Nie Fenghua shook his head and smiled. Our purpose is to stimulate the sword intent in the myriad sword mountain and condense the sword intent into sword crystals. Sword crystals. Nyetian's eyes suddenly trembled when he heard Nie Fenghua's words. He seemed to have understood something. The myriad sword mountain contained an enormous sword intent, and the swordsmen here were like slaves, excavating the sword intent in the mountain. It was similar to being a miner, except that miner excavated ore, while sword slaves excavated sword intent. The sword crystals condensed by the swordsmen have to be handed over. They're not allowed to keep it for themselves. Nie Fenghua smiled bitterly and continued, Eternally Merciless told me that these sword crystals will eventually be handed over to the master of the sword marshals in the sky and circulated in various sacred worlds. So that's how it is. Nie Tian's eyes trembled as he clenched his fists. He finally understood that the so-called sword marshals in the sky was actually a huge mine. However, this mine extracted sword intent and sword crystals. The sword crystals excavated from the myriad sword mountain are extremely popular in the sacred world. Swordsmen who fuse with the sword crystals can directly increase their sword Dao. Nie Fenghua's lips twitched as he said helplessly. The sword crystals were condensed from sword intent. Moreover, it was sword intent nurtured by the world, so it was naturally beneficial to the swordsman. We can't even use the sword intent that we excavated and condensed into sword crystals. Nie Tian's eyes were surging with anger as he said, These people really treat us as slaves. You can't say that. Nie Fenghua furrowed his brows and said, Actually, most people are very willing to be sword slaves here because they can comprehend and absorb the sword intent of the world when they excavate sword intent. It's very beneficial to the swordsman. Take me and Bailey Xingxue as an example. If we didn't practice the sword marshals in the sky, our sword Dao wouldn't be this strong. Nie Tian took a deep breath and calmed himself down before he said, Even so, we don't even have the right to use the sword crystals. Isn't that too depressing? Is that considered depressing? Nie Fenghua's lips twitched as he smiled and said, There's a saying among the sword marshals in the sky, once a slave, forever a slave. The cruelest thing about the sword marshals in the sky is that once we come here, there's almost no chance for us to leave. We can only continue to excavate sword intent and die in the sword marshals in the sky. Nie Tian's eyes widened as he went blank. Why? Nie Fenghua and Bailey Xingxue had both left the sword marshals in the sky, so it didn't seem too difficult for them to leave. Nie Tian, you will soon understand why. But I believe that you can leave the sword marshals in the sky. Nie Fenghua looked at Nie Tian with determination and helplessness. Father, you don't want me to come to the clear sky sword martial arts, right? Nie Tian's eyes narrowed as he saw something and asked in a deep voice. Nie Fenghua's eyes trembled. He was clearly avoiding Nie Tian. After a long time, he finally said, It was Eternally Merciless who asked you to come to the sword marshals in the sky. He used the entire Nie clan to threaten me that you must come to the sky. Nie Tian's expression was very unsightly. Nie Fenghua didn't want Nie Tian to enter the sword marshals in the sky. The one who really wanted Nie Tian to come was Eternally Merciless. Why did Eternally Merciless insist on letting Nie Tian enter the sword marshals in the sky? Eternally Merciless used the entire Nie clan to threaten Nie Fenghua, so the latter had no choice but to do so. With Eternally Merciless strength, not to mention the Nie clan, even destroying the 9 regions would be a piece of cake. But what Nie Tian didn't understand was why Eternally Merciless wanted him to come here. After a while, Nie Tian became much colder. He suddenly looked at Nie Fenghua and asked, Father, what is Eternally Merciless strength? Nie Tian, what is the highest realm of the sword Dao that you know of? Nie Fenghua's eyes darkened as he asked. Transcendent profoundness. Nie Tian nodded and answered truthfully. The realm of the sword Dao that he knew of was the Transcendent Profoundness, one of the 3 Transcendent Profoundness realms. I don't know about Eternally Merciless martial arts cultivation. Nie Fenghua sighed softly and said, But his sword Dao realm is definitely at the Sage realm. Sage realm sword Dao. When Nie Tian heard these words, his pupils shrank, and he couldn't help but exclaim in surprise. Chapter 33:25. Sage Realm Sword Dao. When Nie Tian heard Nie Fenghua suddenly mention the Sage Realm Sword Dao, his eyes couldn't help but tremble and instantly became extremely passionate. He really wanted to know what the realm of the sword Dao above the Transcendence Profoundness was. The Sage Realm Sword Tao is divided into 6 sword realms: Sword Rhythm, Oracle, Sacred Meaning, Sword of Heavenly Calamity, Sword of God-Defying, Sword of Martial Saint. Nie Fenghua looked at Nie Tian and said in a deep voice, "The perception between each realm of the 6 sword realms is like the difference between heaven and earth. Moreover, each sword realm is further divided into 9 layers, from the first layer to the 9th layer. It's no exaggeration to say that between each sword realm, there's a world of difference, and each layer is a suppression." Yes. Nie Tian's eyes shone as he murmured, "Sword Rhythm, Oracle, Sacred Meaning, Sword of Heavenly Calamity, Sword of God-Defying, Sword of Martial Saint. I'll remember the 6 sword realms." Nie Fenghua nodded slightly as she looked at Nie Tian with blazing expectation in her eyes. QL11 to Nie Tian, the path of the Sword Tao was still far away. But Nie Tian could definitely reach the peak of the Sword Tao. "Father, what realm is eternally merciless Sword Tao at?" Nie Tian became cold and couldn't help but ask. He really wanted to know what realm a swordsman like Eternally Merciless had reached in the Sword Tao. Eternally Merciless should be at the Sacred Meaning realm, but I'm not sure about the specific realm. Nie Fenghua frowned and said in a deep voice, "He once told me that the first 3 of the 6 sword realms belong to the Mortal Sage realm, and the last 3 belong to the Paragon Sage realm. Ordinary geniuses of the Sword Tao can reach the Mortal Sage realm, but only an extremely small number of monstrous swordsmen can reach the Paragon Sage realm. Even in the Saint's world, there are only a handful of swordsmen who can reach Saint Ruler," said Jianchen. "The Mortal Saint realm, the utmost Saint realm." Nie Tian frowned and muttered, "It seems that the 3 realms of Sword Aura, Divine Oracle, and Holy Meaning belong to the Mortal Saint realm, while the 3 realms of Sword Tribulation, God-Defying Sword Perception, and Saint Defier belong to the Paragon Saint realm. Eternally Merciless is at the Sage realm, which is the peak of the Mortal Sage realm." Nie Tian muttered to himself as a blazing light appeared in his eyes. With Eternally Merciless talent, he had only reached the Saint realm. It was hard to imagine what kind of swordsman could step into the Saint realm. Afterwards, Nie Tian narrowed his eyes slightly and asked Nie Fenghua, "Father, in other words, Eternally Merciless isn't someone from this world, but a swordsman from the Saint's world, right?" "Yes." Nie Fenghua nodded and said, "Eternally Merciless guards the sword martialism in the sky. He seems to be fulfilling a certain mission. So he's someone from the Saint's world. No wonder he was so stunning when he appeared in the Myriad Regions, and no one knows about his past." Nie Tian's lips twitched as he murmured, "Speaking of which, Eternally Merciless has helped me a lot. If it weren't for him back then, I might have already died." Nie Fenghua furrowed his brows and his eyes flickered as he recalled the events of the past. Back then, he was chased out of the Holy Soul Academy by Kuyo Oniguchi and was heavily injured. Coincidentally, he met Eternally Merciless, and it was the latter who saved him. However, Eternally Merciless clearly had a motive for saving him. But no matter what, Eternally Merciless had saved him. This point, he, Nie Fenghua, would never forget. Even after that, Nie Fenghua had left the sky sword martialism several times because of Eternally Merciless' help. It was as if Eternally Merciless had been exceptionally lenient towards him. It was just that Eternally Merciless was very firm on the matter of Nie Tian entering the sky sword martialism. He definitely had to let Nie Tian enter the sky sword martialism, and he did not even hesitate to use the Nie family to threaten Nie Fenghua. Eternally Merciless is a senior of the Way of the Sword. I respect his strength, and I also respect him for saving my father and me several times." Nie Tian looked at Nie Fenghua and said in a deep voice, "But we are not puppets that can be controlled by anyone. No one can control our fate, not even Eternally Merciless. Fate must be in our own hands." "Yes." Nie Fenghua looked at Nie Tian and could feel the determination in the latter's eyes. He could not help but be moved and nodded heavily. Nie Tian's eyes flickered with a sharp light. It was not that he could not distinguish between gratitude and grudges. On the contrary, he could clearly distinguish between gratitude and grudges. He clearly remembered what Eternally Merciless had said when he had first met him. At that time, Nie Fenghua had been seriously injured. Eternally Merciless had said to Nie Tian, "Nie Fenghua owes me a lot. I helped him, but it seemed that he would not have the chance to help me." Nie Tian's reply to Eternally Merciless had been, "Senior, no matter what my father owes you, I will repay it for him." It was only right and proper for a son to repay his father's debts. It was normal for Nie Fenghua to feel that he owed Eternally Merciless in his heart. If Nie Fenghua could not repay it, it was normal for his son, Nie Tian, to repay it. But if Eternally Merciless felt that he could control Nie Fenghua and Nie Tian in this way, then it was not normal. Nie Tian had saved many people in the past, but he had never forced others to repay it. From Nie Tian's point of view, whether to save or not to save, the choice was in the hands of the person who saved. If you saved someone but asked for repayment, then you were not saving someone, but making a deal. Nie Tian was grateful for everything Eternally Merciless had done, but he would definitely not be controlled by Eternally Merciless. "Father, I want to see Senior Eternally Merciless." After thinking for a while, Nie Tian said to Nie Fenghua. He wanted to find out what Eternally Merciless wanted to do. "The sword seal in the sky will open in a month. The 7 guardians of the sky are currently busy with the opening of the sword seal in the sky. Before the sword seal in the sky opens, Eternally Merciless will not appear." Nie Fenghua frowned and said solemnly, "So that's how it is." Nie Tian nodded slightly. He could only wait until the sword seal in the sky opened before going to see Eternally Merciless. Vaguely, he had a feeling that the reason why Eternally Merciless allowed him to enter the Sky Sword Marshal should be related to the opening of the sword seal in the sky. "Nie Tian, your current level of the sword Dao should be the Transcendent Sword Spirit, right?" At this time, Nie Fenghua looked at Nie Tian and suddenly asked. "Yes." Nie Tian nodded and answered truthfully, "I have just entered the Transcendent Sword Spirit realm, so I should still be in the early stages." "You are already at the peak of the Transcendent Sword Spirit realm." Nie Fenghua's divine sense swept across Nie Tian's body. She laughed and said, "Transcendent Sword Spirit, Transcendent Sword Body, and the 3 realms of Transcendent Ultimacy are originally the transition stage of the Divine Realm Sword Dao to the Saint Realm Sword Dao. The so-called early, middle, late, and peak divisions are all man-made. The improvement of your sword intent is different from that of ordinary swordsmen. If I'm not wrong, your sword intent is a combination of many sword intents, and it has also integrated the power of your bloodline, and there are even other powers, right?" "Yes." Nie Tian nodded, amazed by Nie Fenghua's perception ability. His Godfiend sword intent was formed by the Proud sword intent, the Star's sword intent, the Thunderbolt sword intent, the Soul-devouring sword intent, the 3 Evils sword intent, and several other sword intent. Moreover, when the Godfiend sword intent was released, it could also integrate other powers, including Dragon Chi, Supreme Demon Fire, Heavenly Energy, and even the power of the Divine Evolution Saint Soul. With so many powers fused together, Nie Tian's sword intent far surpassed that of a swordsman of the same level. Sword intent is originally pure, and it is a slow process of accumulation. However, your sword intent's speed of improvement far exceeds that of ordinary people, and it is extremely inclusive. Nie Fenghua's eyes narrowed as she said, "Moreover, in your sword intent, I can sense an aura that is even more terrifying than ordinary saint energy. Perhaps it is this power that makes your sword intent different from others." Chapter 33-26. Breakthrough in Sword Dao. Nie Tian was slightly shocked. He didn't expect Nie Fenghua's perception to be so strong. He had merged with the natal star rune of the previous astral sacred lord, Dong Wang Jingrong, which concealed the aura of the astral energy. Even if he used the astral energy, others wouldn't be able to sense the existence of the astral energy. However, Nie Fenghua could only sense the existence of the astral energy, but he didn't know what it was. The astral energy was the origin of force, and it could contain all kinds of energy. Because of the astral energy, Nie Tian's sword intent could easily merge with other energies. Nie Tian, I have something for you. Suddenly, Nie Fenghua revealed a strange smile and took out a transparent crystal. It was only the size of a thumb, but it emitted a strong aura of sword intent. This is... Nie Tian's eyes trembled as he looked at the transparent crystal. He sensed that this small crystal contained an extremely powerful sword will. It was as if this crystal was condensed from sword will. In the next moment, Nie Tian's eyes trembled and his face stiffened. Could this be a sword crystal? Sword crystal was a crystal formed from the sword intent of a sword slave from the myriad sword mountain. The purpose of a sword slave's existence was to mine sword crystals. The crystal in Nie Fenghua's hand had a strong sword intent aura. It was clearly a sword crystal. However, Nie Fenghua had mentioned that all the crystals obtained from the myriad sword mountain had to be handed over to the guardian. This was the rule of the sword martialism in the sky. If this was a sword crystal, wouldn't Nie Fenghua have violated the rule of the sword martialism in the sky? Nie Tian, don't be nervous. The crystal in my hand is indeed a sword crystal. However, this sword crystal was given to me by Merciless Eternally Merciless. I've never used it, so I'm giving it to you now. Nie Fenghua smiled and handed the sword crystal over. Nie Tian went blank for a moment before hastily saying, "Father, you should keep this sword crystal." How could he not see that Nie Fenghua had been saving the sword crystal and had never been willing to use it? We're father and son. There's no need to be so polite. Nie Fenghua forced a smile and said, "Furthermore, it will be difficult for me to recover from my current state in a short period of time. I can't fuse with the sword crystal at all. The sword seal in the sky will open in a month. If you fuse with this sword crystal, you might be able to improve your sword Dao realm again." Nie Tian frowned, his divine sense probing Nie Fenghua's body. The latter's martial body was indeed very weak. From the looks of it, the backlash from the sword seal had caused great damage to Nie Fenghua's martial body. After a moment of pondering, Nie Tian accepted the sword crystal and said, "All right." After coming to the Sky Sword Martialist and seeing so many Sword Dao experts, he had a strong desire to become stronger. Furthermore, although the Sky Sword Martial seemed calm, it was actually extremely cruel. Mo Qianjun and Jiu Qiansheng's experiences were proof enough. If Nie Tian didn't have great power, he wouldn't even be able to survive, let alone protect others. Nie Tian, you can slowly stimulate the sword intent in the sword crystal, then slowly absorb it and transform it into... Nie Fenghua said to Nie Tian with a smile. However, before he could finish speaking, his whole body froze. Nie Tian took the sword crystal, raised his head and swallowed it. He hadn't seen it wrong. Nie Tian had really swallowed the sword crystal. Nie Tian, you... Nie Fenghua's eyes trembled. He was so shocked that he couldn't speak. The sword crystal contained an extremely violent sword intent. It was like a beast core, and it had a great impact on a warrior's martial body. Would Nie Tian really be fine swallowing the sword crystal like that? "Father, don't worry. I'll be fine." Nie Tian smiled faintly. However, as soon as he finished speaking, his face suddenly stiffened. Beads of sweat appeared on his forehead, and his face contorted in pain. "Nie Tian, are you okay?" Nie Fenghua's eyes trembled. He was really afraid that Nie Tian would explode and die in the next moment. This kind of thing wasn't unheard of. Some sword slaves wanted to hide the sword crystal, but they were afraid of being discovered, so they swallowed it. However, They couldn't bear the power of the sword crystal and died in the end. Nye Tian's current situation wouldn't be the same as those people, right? I'm fine. Nye Tian endured the great pain and spoke with difficulty. He hadn't expected that the sword crystal would be so powerful. The moment the sword crystal entered his body, a burst of sword intent erupted. It was like a broken dam, and it crazily attacked his martial body as if it wanted to break it. Nye Tian, focus and fuse the power of the stars with the sword crystal. At this moment, the Ghost Emperor's voice sounded out. Okay. Nye Tian answered and began to release the power of the stars to fuse with the sword crystal's sword intent. The sword intent was born from the heavens and earth, and it had an extremely violent aura. However, with the power of the stars as a buffer, the violent sword intent gradually stabilized and began to slowly fuse with the power of the stars. At this moment, Nye Tian's aura stabilized, and he became much calmer. He could feel the sword intent in his body skyrocketing, giving him a feeling that his power was about to explode. The sword intent contained in the sword crystal was being absorbed by Nye Tian, causing his sword intent to skyrocket. This. Nye Fenghua looked at Nye Tian in front of him, and he couldn't believe his eyes. He was dumbfounded, and his mouth was wide open, but he couldn't say a word. He couldn't imagine that Nye Tian's martial body was so terrifying that he could absorb and fuse with the power of the sword crystal in an instant. The sword intent in the sword crystal was so violent that even the 6 experts in the sky couldn't absorb it in an instant. Next, Nye Tian sat cross-legged as if he had entered a state of cultivation. His aura was calm, and he steadily fused with the power of the sword crystal. Nye Fenghua was very nervous. He stayed by Nye Tian's side, sensing Nye Tian's aura at all times. He didn't dare to be careless. Soon, 3 days had passed. Boom! Nye Tian suddenly opened his eyes, and a terrifying sword aura erupted from his body. It soared into the sky, and it was incomparably vigorous, making him look like a sharp sword that lay across the heavens and the earth. Nye Tian. Nye Fenghua looked at Nye Tian, and his eyes trembled. He took a step forward, and his face froze again when he felt the aura of the latter's sword intent. He couldn't believe that Nye Tian had actually made a breakthrough in the way of the sword. At this moment, Nye Tian had already broken through from the transcendent soul realm to the transcendent sword body realm. 3 days. In just 3 days, Nye Tian had fused with the sword crystal and directly achieved a breakthrough in the way of the sword. It was too terrifying. One had to know that even swordsmen at the level of the 6th great sky needed several months to completely fuse with a sword crystal. Moreover, the sword crystal that Nye Tian had fused with was the 10,000-layer sword crystal. The sword intent within it was extremely powerful. It was unimaginable how powerful Nye Tian's martial body was, and how terrifying the power contained within his body was. The sword crystal is indeed a good thing. Nye Tian's gaze was extremely sharp, and the corner of his mouth twitched as he muttered. He was also very surprised that a small sword crystal had actually helped him break through to the transcendent sword body realm. Actually, the reason why he was able to absorb the sword crystal's power so quickly was not only because of the power of the stars, but also because of the heavenly Tao formation within his body. The sword crystal contained the sword intent that was born from the world, and it was compatible with the power of the heavens. Nye Tian's body was already filled with heavenly energy, so it was much easier to fuse with the sword intent of the heaven and earth. With the transcendent sword body realm, I have taken another step towards the Saint Realm Sword Tao. The breakthrough in the way of the sword made Nye Tian extremely happy. Chapter 33:27. 3000 Heavenly Tao. 3000 Heavenly Tao. The Heavenly Tao runes on the Heavenly Tao shackles have become active. Nye Tian was shocked as he inspected his martial body. The 9 Heavenly Tao shackles in his body were engraved with Heavenly Tao runes. The Heavenly Tao runes were very calm before, but they had become active now. It's the sword intent of the heaven and earth inside the sword crystal. It has activated the heavenly Tao runes. The heavenly Tao runes seem to be unsealed. The Ghost Emperor's eyes trembled as he exclaimed excitedly. The heavenly Tao runes are unsealed? Nie Tian was startled. He had to admit that even though he had the heavenly Tao force and the heavenly Tao shackles in his body, he had no idea what they were, nor did he know what the heavenly Tao runes on the heavenly Tao shackles were. How could he not be surprised when the Ghost Emperor suddenly said that the heavenly Tao runes were unsealed? Could it be that the heavenly Tao runes on the heavenly Tao shackles were some kind of seal? Bang! 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 At that moment, a series of explosions came from the heavenly Tao shackles. The heavenly Tao runes were unsealed. At this moment, Nie Tian felt that his body was filled with a mysterious aura, which flowed through his body like a gurgling stream, making him feel extremely comfortable. It was as if all the pores in his body had been opened, and his body was free, without any restraints or restraints. The heavens and earth were boundless, and the universe was vast. It was as if the entire world was an illusion. The man was the heavens and earth, and the heavens and earth were the man. However, after a while, the heavenly Tao runes stopped unsealing, and the mysterious aura disappeared. Nie Tian was shocked, and it took him a long time to recover his composure. At that moment, Nie Tian seemed to have sensed something. His eyes flickered, and he was so shocked that he couldn't speak a word. At that moment, he felt that his martial physique was extremely comfortable. It had completely recovered, and his condition had returned to its peak. He was seriously injured previously, and it would take him at least 10 days to recover. However, he had miraculously recovered now. It's the power of the heavenly Tao runes. Nie Tian reacted in the next second, and his eyes flickered with astonishment. Before the heavenly Tao runes were unsealed, his martial body had not recovered. However, after the heavenly Tao runes were unsealed, his martial body had actually recovered. This undoubtedly meant that it was the power of the heavenly runes that allowed his martial physique to recover instantly. Ghost Emperor, just what kind of power does the heavenly Tao rune have? It's so terrifying. Nie Tian's eyes trembled as he asked the Ghost Emperor. This emperor doesn't know either. The heavenly Tao shackles and heavenly Tao runes are both powers that originate from the heavenly Tao sacred heart. They should be the highest level of sacred power. The Ghost Emperor frowned and said, "When the heavenly Tao runes were unsealed, I sensed that there were 3,000 heavenly Tao runes on each of the heavenly Tao shackles. You only unsealed 1,000th of them. 3,000 heaven Tao runes." Nie Tian's eyes flickered with astonishment after hearing the Ghost Monarch's words. "Yes." The Ghost Emperor nodded and said, "There are 9 heavenly Tao shackles in your body. 3 heavenly Tao runes have been unsealed for each shackle. That's a total of 27 heavenly Tao runes." Nie Tian's eyes narrowed as he was even more astonished. Just 27 heavenly Tao runes were enough to allow his martial physique to recover in an instant. How terrifying would it be if all the heavenly Tao runes were unsealed? The unsealing of the heavenly Tao runes has greatly improved your martial physique. Your martial physique should be even stronger than before. The Ghost Emperor's eyes flickered as he said in a deep voice. Nie Tian nodded as his lips curled into a smile. He had long sensed that his martial physique was much stronger than before. "Nie Tian, you've recovered?" At this time, Nie Fenghua, who had been stunned into a daze, finally came to her senses. Her eyes were slightly trembling, and her face was filled with disbelief as she looked at Nie Tian. He even suspected that he had sensed wrongly. Nie Tian's martial physique had fully recovered, but how was that possible? Nie Tian was clearly severely injured before. At this moment, Nie Fenghua finally realized that the sun in front of him had a hidden power that he could not comprehend. The corner of Nie Tian's mouth curled up into a faint smile. Nie Fenghua's eyes trembled a few times before he nodded and accepted the facts in front of him. Father, I have to go back immediately to see how Mo Qianjun and the others are doing. Nie Tian immediately said as he suddenly thought of Mo Qianjun and Jiu Qianxing. I also have some matters to attend to. If you need anything, come to the 9th Sword Arena to find me. Nie Fenghua nodded and did not stay any longer. He had the identity of 1,000 swords in the sky sword marshal 3 heavens. There were indeed many matters waiting for him to attend to when he returned to the sky sword marshal 3 heavens. Father, I won't let you down. Nie Tian looked at Nie Fenghua's disappearing figure and muttered to himself with a firm look in his eyes. Then, he moved and flew toward the valley where Mo Qianjun was. A moment later, Nie Tian arrived outside the valley. He directly stepped into the valley. However, his expression changed and his heart sank. Mo Qianjun and Jiu Qianxing were not in the valley. Oh no! Nie Tian's expression was terrifyingly gloomy. He felt inexplicably uneasy. Mo Qianjun should be in the valley taking care of Jiu Qianxing. Why were the two of them missing? Even if Mo Qianjun had something to attend to, he should not have brought Jiu Qianxing with him. Go and find them! Nie Tian roared. Then, his figure moved. He took a step and soared into the sky like a flood dragon. He looked down from high in the sky and spread out his divine sense to sense the auras of Mo Qianjun and Jiu Qianxing. At this moment, he saw many martial artists surrounding the sword shadows in the sky. They were all attacking the sword shadows and activating the sword intent in the sword shadows. Such a scene was no different from a minesweeper working hard in a mine. In fact, Nie Tian even saw some overseers watching from the side. If they found the sword slave displeasing to the eye, they would directly send a stream of sword intent over, leaving behind a bloody scar. Could it be that Brother Mo and Brother Jiuqian also went to mine the sword intent? Nie Tian frowned and his heart sank. Mo Qianjun was still fine, but how could Jiu Qianxing go and mine the sword intent in his current state? Nie Tian grew anxious. His astral soul wings appeared on his back and he increased his speed to search for Mo Qianjun and Jiu Qianxing. The sword mountain in front of Nie Tian was clearly divided into 9 regions. In other words, there were 9 sword grounds. After half a day, Nie Tian searched all 9 sword grounds, but he still couldn't find Mo Qianjun and Jiu Qianxing. Where did they go? Nie Tian was burning with anxiety. If he couldn't find the 2 of them, he would have to look for the 6th sky. At this moment, a silhouette attracted Nie Tian's attention. This silhouette was none other than Han Qianqiu. Han Qianqiu! Nie Tian's eyes flickered. With a flap of his wings, he soared towards Han Qianqiu like an eagle. Who's there? Han Qianqiu, who was hovering in the air, suddenly felt a chill on his back. He couldn't help but let out a strange cry as he turned around. Chapter 33:28. Life or Death Boom. Suddenly, a violent pressure descended from the sky, causing the void to tremble. A figure appeared, his aura sharp and violent like a sword. It was extremely terrifying. It's that kid. At this time, the crowd reacted and looked at Nie Tian. They recognized him and cried out in panic. Although Nie Tian had just arrived in the sky, his shocking battle record of killing Black Serpent and drawing with Han Qianqiu had long been remembered by most of the people. More importantly, Nie Tian was the first person from the sky to be challenged. Many of the people present had a deep impression of him. At this time, Nie Tian seemed to be coming for Han Qianqiu. This kid still has a battle with the 6th sky. Why is he here instead of cultivating? From the looks of it, he's here for Han Qianjian. Could it be that he didn't enjoy the last battle with Han Qianjian and wants to fight again? The crowd whispered to each other as they fixed their gazes on Nie Tian. Their eyes were filled with burning desire. Of course, they wanted to see Nie Tian and Han Qianqiu fight again. Kid, what are you doing? Han Qianqiu looked at Nie Tian, his eyes trembling. He was clearly very frightened. How could he not feel that Nye Tian's aura was much stronger than it was 3 days ago? He was very puzzled. 3 days ago, Nye Tian was clearly seriously injured. How could he recover so quickly? What was even more unbelievable was that Nye Tian's sword Dao had a breakthrough. If he hadn't seen this with his own eyes, he wouldn't have believed it. With Nye Tian's talent, it was no wonder that the sixth sky valued him. Where's my friend? Nye Tianling stood in the void, his eyes filled with cold light. He locked onto Han Qianqiu like a vicious wolf, as if he was going to launch his most terrifying attack at any moment. What friend? Han Qianqiu's eyes flashed, then he shouted, I've never seen him before. That's not the answer I want. Nye Tian's pupils shrank. His face was so gloomy that it was almost dripping blood. Cold spoke. He could no longer suppress his killing intent. Mo Qianjun and Jiu Qiansheng were Black Snake's subordinates, and Black Snake was Han Qianqiu's subordinate. How could Han Qianqiu not know that Mo Qianjun and Jiu Qianshengren had disappeared? Furthermore, ever since Nye Tian had come to the Sky Sword Martial School, he had only made enemies with Han Qianqiu. Han Qianqiu had even tried to kill him in front of Nye Tian. Han Qianqiu's reaction was clearly one of panic. The mysterious disappearance of Mo Qianjun and Jiu Qiansheng must be related to him. I don't know where they are. When Han Qianqiu sensed the killing intent in Nye Tian's eyes, his expression became even more panicked. He let out a strange cry, and his voice became even sharper. Them? Nye Tianling laughed and said, Did I say that I have more than one friend? Han Qianqiu's eyes trembled, and he was suddenly speechless. Han Qianqiu, I'll ask you one more time. Where are my friends? Nye Tian's eyes were cold and murderous. He spoke in a deep voice. The killing intent in his body condensed and surged in the void, causing the atmosphere to become very oppressive and suffocating. This thousand swords doesn't know. Han Qianqiu's eyes darkened. He calmed down a little and roared, Even if you ask 1,000 times, 10,000 times, you still won't know. You're courting death. Nye Tian roared and stepped forward. His aura was like a mountain, rolling endlessly towards Han Qianqiu. Boom! In an instant, Han Qianqiu felt a suppressive force fall on him, as if it was going to tear his entire body apart. His eyes trembled, and the fear in his heart was written all over his face. He never expected that Nye Tian could burst out with such a terrifying aura in an instant. The current Nye Tian was much stronger than he had been 3 days ago. Bang! In the next moment, a muffled sound came from the void. Han Qianqiu's figure was knocked back dozens of meters. After stabilizing himself, he spat out a mouthful of blood. How is this possible? Seeing this scene, the crowd's expression changed. They immediately cried out in shock and disbelief. How could Nye Tian injure Han Qianqiu with a mere sword move? Were their eyes playing tricks on them? In the past 3 days, it was clearly Han Qianqiu who was suppressing Nye Tian. What did Nye Tian experience in the past 3 days? How did he become so strong? One question after another made everyone look at Nye Tian with trembling expressions, as if they were looking at a monster. A person who achieved a qualitative increase in strength in 3 days, if he wasn't a monster, what was he? Stinking brat, how did you? Han Qianqiu looked at Nye Tian with trembling eyes. He was so shocked that he couldn't speak. He couldn't believe that Nye Tian had the strength to suppress him. I'll suppress you with one sword strike. Nye Tian's eyes were as sharp as swords. He let out a low roar like a wild beast. Immediately after, he crazily released sword intent from his whole body. The terrifying sword intent whistled in the air like a storm. As the stars heavenly slash down, an earth-shattering sword hum reverberated in the void. Boom! In the next moment, a sword shadow crashed down like a huge wave, suppressing the void and suppressing Han Qianqiu. Han Qianqiu suddenly felt the space around him tighten. The boundless sword intent actually sealed the space around him, making it impossible for him to retreat. He could only take the attack head-on. Damn it! Han Qianqiu roared and released a shield of sword intent in front of him to resist the enormous pressure. Wang! Crack, crack, crack! When the sword shadow landed on the shield, it actually let out a low rumbling sound. The sword shadow tore through the shield and then stopped in midair. Obviously, Nie Tian was controlling the sword shadow and didn't let it fall. His control of sword intent had reached such a level that it had reached perfection. The crowd was shocked. Countless pairs of eyes were wide open and their nerves were tense. Nie Tian was simply too frightening. If this sword strike landed, Han Qianqiu would definitely be reduced to ashes. Was this still a swordfish? Was this still the swordsman from 3 days ago? 1,000 swords expert was actually powerless under Nie Tian's sword. What was even more unacceptable was that Nie Tian only had the strength of an 8th stage false saint. Han Qianqiu, you still have one chance to speak. If what you're going to say next is not what I want to hear, then don't blame me for being ruthless. At this time, Nie Tian said in a low voice with a sinister chill, life or death, it's your choice. These words fell on Han Qianqiu's ears like thunder, causing him to panic. His whole body was drenched in cold sweat. A sword hanging above one's head was more frightening than a sword falling down. Nie Tian's methods were vicious. Han Qianqiu's eyes trembled as he looked at Nie Tian. Just as he was about to open his mouth, he suddenly stopped. After thinking for a long time, he finally opened his mouth again and said, Your friend, I'm Yang Wanjian. Yang Wanjian. Nie Tian's eyes darkened and cold killing intent. What's his name? Yang Sun. Han Qianqiu's expression changed. After hesitating for a while, he said the name. The person who captured Mo Qianjun and Jiu Qianxing was called Yang Sun. He was one of the Sky sword warriors, Wan Jian, Han Qianqiu's immediate superior. Chapter 33-29. Nie Tian looked at Han Qianqiu and spoke in a cold tone. Why you're going to look for Lord Wan Jian? Han Qianqiu felt the pressure on his head lessen, and he finally managed to catch his breath. However, his expression became even more flustered, and his voice trembled as his teeth chattered. He had never expected that Nie Tian would actually want to look for Yang Sun directly. One must know that Yang Sun's identity as Wan Jian was already a terrifying existence in the entire Sky Swordsman. In the entire Sky Swordsman, there were only a few dozen Wan Jians. Furthermore, even the Sky Guardians or Sky Sword Slaves wouldn't easily make a move against a Wan Jian. Nie Tian was just a swordfish that had just arrived in the Sky Swordsman. Was he really going to make a move against a Wan Jian just to save his friend? The crowd was also shocked when they heard Nie Tian's words. Is this kid crazy? He's actually going to look for Lord Wan Jian directly. This fellow's combat strength is indeed powerful, and he can become 1,000 swords directly. However, he's too young and impulsive. Yang Wan Jian is famous for his ferocity, so it'll be difficult for him to return alive if he goes there directly. Isn't this kid highly valued by Lord Six Sky? Why doesn't he look for Lord Six Sky instead? The crowd discussed, and their expressions were filled with fear when Yang Sun was mentioned. The Sky Swordsman had a strict hierarchy, and Yang Sun was a Wan Jian. He could even kill sword slaves below 100 swords at will. Rumor had it that Yang Sun had killed hundreds of swordfish in a fit of rage, and he wasn't punished at all. It seemed like there was a powerful figure behind Yang Sun, and even the 6 great Sky Swordsmen didn't dare to touch him. In fact, a sword slave in the Sky Swordsman was also a sword slave, but it was just the highest level sword slave in the Sky Swordsman. The sword slaves in the Sky Swordsman were like the greatest supervisors, and the true masters of the Sky Swordsman were the 7 Sky Guardians. In the Sky Sword martial arts, martial strength was the most important. As long as you have enough strength, you can challenge people who are of a higher level than you. Just like Nye Tian, he could directly challenge Han Qianqiu. As long as he could kill Han Qianqiu, he could replace Han Qianqiu's position. Even the sword slaves in the sky could be challenged. However, the sky sword pellets had existed for tens of thousands of years, and no sword slave had ever dared to challenge the sky sword pellet. Take me there. Nye Tian's gaze was gloomy and cold like a cold pond, and it emitted a bone-piercing chill as he coldly said, "Bring me there." "Kid, are you crazy?" Han Qianqiu stared blankly for a moment before shouting, "Is it worth risking your life for your two useless friends? Do you know who Lord Wan Jian is? If I bring you there, we'll both die." Yang Sun was cruel and bloodthirsty. He was famous among the sky sword martial artists. Han Qianqiu knew that if he brought Nye Tian to meet Yang Sun, there would only be one outcome: death. Yang Sun had the backing of a powerful figure, so he wasn't even afraid of the sky sword martial artists. "My friends aren't useless." The look in Nye Tian's eyes darkened as he let out a roar. Immediately, the sword shadow that was floating in midair suddenly sank down and directly pressed down. Boom! A muffled sound rang out in the air as Han Qianqiu's figure was sent flying. A bloody light appeared in the air, and the stench of blood filled the air. "Arg! My arm!" Han Qianqiu stabilized himself. Half of his body was covered in blood, and one of his arms had been shattered. Nye Tian didn't kill him. Instead, he broke one of his arms. "I'll say it one more time. Bring me there." Nye Tian's gaze was gloomy as he spoke in a cold tone. Sensing the killing intent in Nye Tian's eyes, Han Qianqiu hesitated for a few seconds before nodding his head. I'll bring you there. Let's go." With a bellow, Nye Tian arrived by Han Qianqiu's side in a single step like a wild beast. Then, he reached out his hand and lifted Han Qianqiu off the ground. Han Qianqiu felt the power around Nye Tian's body and trembled in fear. He couldn't imagine how a rank 8 pseudo-sacred martial artist could have such a powerful martial body. That kid really went to look for Lord Wan Jian. Everyone looked at the disappearing figures of Nye Tian and Han Qianqiu, and their eyes couldn't help but tremble. They couldn't wait to follow and take a look. Under Han Qianqiu's lead, Nye Tian soon arrived at a huge valley. At the entrance of the valley, 2 giant swords hung down from the sky. The aura was incomparably sharp, and it gave people a strong sense of oppression. These 2 giant swords were like huge doors, imposing and majestic. "Lord Wan Jian is inside." Han Qianqiu looked at the valley in front of him and said in a trembling voice. At the same time, in the valley, to be exact, this was no longer a valley, but an open-air plaza. On the plaza, there was a huge platform surrounded by huge pavilions. At this moment, there were dozens of female swordsmen dancing on the platform. They were graceful like fairies. These female swordsmen were all dressed in chiffon clothes, and their faces were exquisite and beautiful. As they danced, their graceful figures could be seen through the chiffon. What was even more shocking was that these female swordsmen were extremely strong. Even the weakest of them was a pseudo-sacred martial artist with a transcendent sword soul. QL11 with such strength, they would definitely be monstrous powerhouses in the realms. However, at this moment, they could only sing and dance for the entertainment of others. In each of the pavilions outside the high platform, there was a middle-aged man dressed in luxurious clothes. Beside them, there were several scantily clad women serving them. These women were actually swordsmen as well, and their strength was no weaker than the female swordsmen on the high platform. Ha ha! Brother Yang, the swordsmen this time are really not bad. They're much better than the previous batch. At this time, a man was drinking and laughing at the same time. He looked at the high platform with an undisguised lustful gaze. These swordsmen are not bad, but these maidservants are a lot worse. The person who was addressed as Brother Yang was a middle-aged man with a fat head and big ears. He sneered and suddenly looked at one of the maidservants beside him coldly. The corner of his mouth twitched, and he reached out and grabbed the maidservant by her neck. "Brother Yang, are you going to kill someone again?" The eyes of the others trembled when they saw this, and they actually became excited. This fat man was the famous sky swordsman, Wan Jian Yang Sun. As for the other men, their identities were the same as Yang Sun, Wan Jian. With a status like Wan Jian, there was no need for him to mind sword intent. These Wan Jian swordsmen could not come out to the sky swordsmen, so they found some female swordsmen to have some fun. These female swordsmen were all forcibly brought to the sky swordsmen. Compared to the sword slaves who mined the sword intent, their experiences were even more tragic. Not only did they have to serve Yang Sun and the others, but they would also be killed if they were not careful. For example, Yang Sun was so angry that he wanted to kill the maidservant in his hand. The other Wan Jian swordsmen were already used to this scene, so they were not nervous at all. Instead, they were looking forward to the scene of Yang Sun strangling the maidservant to death. Chapter 33:30. Who is Yang Sun? Little girl, your face has always been dark. Is it because you're serving this 10,000 swords that you're unhappy? Coming to the sky sword marshals, do you still think you are a missy? Yang Sun sneered as he exerted force in his hand. The maid's face turned red as she struggled with all her might. However, it was useless. The difference in strength between her and Yang Sun was too great. Before coming to the sky sword marshals, these female swordsmen were all genius swordsmen with distinguished identities. However, in the sky sword marshals they were treated like slaves. Of course they felt uncomfortable. Yang Sun was unhappy because this maid didn't smile when she was serving Yang Sun. I don't dare anymore. The maid struggled and used all her strength to speak. Go to hell. However, Yang Sun did not seem to hear her words. With a roar, he exerted force in his hand. Bang! In the next instant, a muffled sound was heard. Blood splattered in the air. Yang Sun had actually crushed the maid's neck. A genius swordswoman died just like that. The other maids were stunned by the scene in front of them. Their pretty faces were blank, and could not react for a long time. Bad luck. Yang Sun could not help but frown when his hand was stained with blood. He shook his hand as if nothing had happened. It was as if the person he killed was not a human, but an ant. In his eyes, these female swordsmen were no different from ants. They were to be trampled and slaughtered by him. Ha ha! Brother Yang did not disappoint us indeed. Come, let us toast to Brother Yang. At this time, the other 10,000 swords members laughed heartily, stood up one after another, and toasted Yang Sun. Although they were all Wan Jians, they were all respectful to Yang Sun. It was obvious that they were afraid of him. What they were afraid of was not Yang Sun's strength, but the person behind him. They all knew that behind Yang Sun, there was a guardian of the sky sword marshals. Furthermore, Yang Sun was different from the other Wan Jians. He came from the sacred world. He seemed to have made some mistake and was exiled to the sky sword martial school. Come, drink. Yang Sun laughed. He did not stand up. He just raised his cup and drank it in one gulp. Bang! However, at that moment, a muffled explosion sounded out as a black silhouette flew out and smashed into the stage, causing the female swordsman to cry out in fear and retreat. Someone's barging in. The other Wan Jians exclaimed in shock. This was a place where they had fun, and it was considered a forbidden area for sword practitioners in the sky. Who would be so bold as to barge in? Han Qianqiu. Yang Sun's face sank. When he saw that the figure on the high platform was Han Qianqiu, he immediately stood up and roared, "What the hell are you doing? Lord Yang, I." Han Qianqiu struggled to his feet. His entire body was covered in blood, and his eyes were trembling as he spoke. Who is Yang Sun? However, before he could finish his words, a furious voice could be heard. Following it, a figure stepped out from the sky and stood in the air like a giant sword. The figure was none other than Ye Tian. There were some forbidding formations set up in the valley, which was why it took Ye Tian some time to get in. The crowd of Wang Jian's and female swordsmen's eyes widened when they saw Nie Tian's sudden appearance. Who was this person, to be so bold as to barge in? How dare you? Yang Sun glared at Nie Tian with eyes spitting flames of anger. He let out a roar and crushed the cup in his hand. He had been in the Sky Sword Martial School for a long time, but no one had ever dared to act so impudently in front of him. What was even more intolerable was that Nie Tian was only an 8th order pseudo-sacred cultivator. You're Yang Sun. Hovering in midair, Nie Tian's eyes turned and locked onto Yang Sun like a sharp blade. Every word he uttered was filled with cold, killing intent. The maidservant beside Yang Sun was completely dumbfounded. Her eyes trembled as she stared at Nie Tian. The astonishment in her heart was perfectly displayed on her face. You dare to provoke me? Are you tired of living? Yang Sun let out a furious roar. His aura exploded forth, causing the gazebo to collapse. Then, he took a step forward, and an incomparably vigorous sword aura rolled out, rolling in the air like dark clouds that filled the sky, and madly pressed down on Nie Tian. At this moment, Yang Sun's terrifying strength was mercilessly exposed. From the terrifying sword aura alone, it was obvious that Yang Sun's strength had far surpassed Han Qianqiu's. His sword art had definitely reached the sacred realm, and he had reached the realm of sword rhythm. As violent as Yang Sun was, his attacks were incomparably vicious. He intended to crush Nie Tian with his sword. He did not care why Nie Tian was here. Anyone who dared to act arrogantly in front of him must die. Boom! In the blink of an eye, Nie Tian felt the space around him tighten. A terrifying oppressive force descended, trying to crush him to death. The other Wang Jian powerhouses watched from the side and sneered as they discussed. Who is this kid? How dare he barge into Brother Yang's territory? He's courting death. This hothead is fierce and aggressive. It seems like he's here to settle scores with Brother Yang. Settle scores? I think he's here to seek death. The group of Wang Jians laughed wantonly. Obviously, they did not take Nie Tian seriously. A cultivator who was not even a rank 9 pseudo-sage came to find trouble with Yang Sun. If this wasn't seeking death, then what was? Such an ant should be crushed to death. There was nothing more to say. You think you can suppress me? However, at this moment, Nie Tian let out a loud roar. Sword intent surged out from his body like a raging wave and crashed into the void, causing the mountains to collapse and the earth to crack. Everyone's eyes flickered as they exclaimed in shock. They did not expect Nie Tian to be able to exert such terrifying power under Yang Sun's suppression. Bang! The next moment, a muffled sound came from the void. Yang Sun's aura was directly shattered and turned into a raging wave that surged in the void. Yang Sun's body swayed and he was forced to take a few steps back. His face was ugly to the extreme and he could not believe it. An rank 8 pseudo-sage cultivator had forcefully shattered his sword aura. How was this possible? Yang Sun's eyes trembled. The way he looked at Nie Tian changed slightly. It was no longer as disdainful as before. At this moment, he knew that the person standing in front of him was a monstrous talent. The others were even more shocked. Their mouths were wide open as they stared at Nie Tian in shock. Yang Sun. Nie Tian's sword aura surged and his eyes were like those of a wild beast. They were extremely terrifying as he stared at Yang Sun and roared. One had to admit that Yang Sun's strength was indeed terrifying. Fortunately, Nie Tian had just achieved a breakthrough in his sword Dao. Furthermore, his martial body was even stronger with the help of the heavenly runes. Otherwise, it would have been very difficult for him to break through Yang Sun's sword aura. Kid, who are you? Yang Sun looked at Nie Tian and asked in a low voice. He actually felt a trace of threat from Nie Tian. Chapter 33-31. Sword of Desolation. Yang Sun stared at Nie Tian, his eyes trembling. He felt threatened by Nie Tian. He could not believe that an 8th order pseudo-saint swordsman with the transcendent sword body could make him, a swordsman of the Saint Realm, feel threatened. He sensed that Nye Tian had a terrifying power hidden in his body, and this power made him fearful. Moreover, the power that Nye Tian had displayed just now was too strange. It was far beyond the power of warriors of the same level. Where are my friends? Nye Tian's eyes were murderous, and his cold voice trembled in the void, full of murderous intent. Friends! Yang Sun was stunned, feeling a little strange. Emo Qianjun and Jiu Qianxing, Nye Tianling said coldly, the murderous intent in his eyes growing stronger. Who are they? Yang Sun was stunned again, still feeling very strange. Lord Yang, they are the corpse-eating ghostly slave you asked me to catch, and his friend, Han Qianqiu said with an ugly expression. So, it's those two ants. Yang Sun came to his senses, and his eyes darkened slightly. He sneered and said, You are the friend of those two ants. It seems that the rumored person challenged by the sixth sky is you. I'll ask you again, where are my friends? Nye Tian's eyes were cold, and his body was surrounded by sword will. The sword momentum around him became more and more terrifying. It was extremely fierce, as if it was going to tear the sky apart. When everyone saw this and felt the sword will aura on Nye Tian, they could not help but frown, and their expressions became strange. This kid is so strange. He is clearly only at the transcendent sword body realm, but why is his sword will stronger than that of a transcendent esoteric swordsman? I heard that this kid has just arrived at the Sky Sword Martial School, and it seems that Lord Sixth Sky is very interested in him. Could he be a guy with a background? So what if he has a background? How dare he show off in front of Brother Yang? He is courting death. As they discussed, the way they looked at Nye Tian couldn't help but turn cold. Yang Sun had the support of a guardian, not to mention the fact that Nye Tian was someone valued by the Sixth Sky. Even if the Sixth Sky came personally, Yang Sun would not be afraid. All of a sudden, Yang Sun let out a cold laugh. His eyes stared at Nye Tian with a cunning expression and said, Little brat, you're a genius. As long as you follow me in the future and obediently become my dog, I, Wan Jian, guarantee that you will be able to walk unhindered in the Sky Sword martial world. Also, you can pick any of these beauties before you. If you like one, you can take her with you. But you must promise me that you will be loyal to me, Wan Jian, and be an obedient dog. Whoever I, Wan Jian, ask you to bite, you must bite. Yang Sun's arrogant voice was very domineering. He looked at Nye Tian, his eyes rolling around. His expression seemed to be saying, Brat, I'm going to eat you up. The others were startled when they heard Yang Sun's words. Based on Yang Sun's ruthlessness, not only did Nye Tian not kill him after barging into this place, but he was trying to recruit him instead. However, that wasn't surprising. After all, Nye Tian's talent was simply too frightening and shocking. Little brat, think about it carefully. This is a chance for you to live. Yang Sun raised his eyebrows when he saw Nye Tian's gloomy expression. I'll be your father. Nye Tian's face grew grim, and his eyes turned bloodshot. He could no longer suppress his rage, and it burst forth with a loud rumble. Like a terrifying raging wave, it crashed into the void, looking extremely terrifying. Yang Sun was too full of himself, asking Nye Tian to be his dog. What a joke! As a human, one should live with dignity. A righteous aura that could soar to the 9 heavens. You don't know what's good for you. Yang Sun's eyes flickered as his anger soared to the sky. A violent aura spread out from his body, making him look like a ferocious beast. Asking Nye Tian to be his dog was already a great compromise. However, Nye Tian still scolded him. How could he not be angry? Bang! In the next moment, Yang Sun took a step forward, causing the void to tremble violently. Immediately afterwards, a stream of dark sword intent surged out, forming a terrifying rift in the air. Carrying an intense aura of desolation, it spread towards Nye Tian. Desolation sword essence. When the other 10,000 swords saw this, their eyes trembled and they exclaimed. Yang Sun cultivated the desolate sword intent, which was extremely terrifying. The desolate force contained within the sword intent had a strong corrosive effect on a cultivator's martial physique and divine soul. Once, when Yang Sun had a conflict with another Wan Jian's expert, he used the desolate sword intent to slowly corrode his opponent's martial physique. Now that Yang Sun thought about it, he could still clearly remember the tragic scene before his death. At this moment, Yang Sun released the desolate sword intent to kill Nie Tian. If it was any other Wan Jians, they would not dare to be so cruel. After all, Nie Tian still had a duel with the sixth sky. However, Yang Sun didn't care about that. Nie Tian dared to be so arrogant in front of him, he had to kill him. Wan Jian, is it? Nie Tianling laughed and roared. Today, I want to see how strong you so-called Wan Jians are. What gives you the right to be so arrogant? Boom. As soon as he finished speaking, he stabbed out with his sword. A terrifying wave of sword intent appeared and headed toward the crack. A loud explosion took place in the sky as the two forces crumbled at the same time. Nie Tian's figure took a step back as blood flowed out from the corner of his mouth. Yang Sun's body swayed as he looked at Nie Tian in shock once again. The desolate sword intent he released actually failed to kill Nie Tian. Instead, it only slightly injured Nie Tian. This was unbelievable. Was the swordsman in front of him really only at the 8th stage pseudo-sage realm with the divine sword body realm? One had to know that Yang Sun was not only a sage realm swordsman at the sword aura realm, but he was also a sage. However, the strength of a sage realm martialist would be suppressed in the sword martial art realm in the sky. The sword martial art in the sky was filled with terrifying sword intent, which naturally formed a huge sword principle restriction. It had a strong suppression on all sage realm martialists. Even so, Yang Sun's strength was far from what a 9th stage pseudo-sage realm martialist could compare to. Moreover, the sword martial art in the sky did not suppress the swordsman's sword principle strength at all. Yang Sun was a swordsman at the 2nd heaven of sword aura realm, but he couldn't kill a swordsman with the divine sword body realm. Was this a joke? Is this all you've got? Nie Tian stabilized his body. His eyes released a cold light as he looked at Yang Sun coldly. He growled, his eyes surging with strong disdain. Brat, you're courting death. Yang Sun was completely enraged. The sword intent in his body tumbled violently to the extreme. There was an explosion in the air, and black cracks appeared all over his body, releasing a strong desolate chi. Sword of Desolation. Immediately after, Yang Sun roared, and the desolate cracks condensed into a sword in his hand. It was his sword of original spirit, the Sword of Desolation. Sword of Desolation. The other Wan Jian's eyes trembled as they stared at the Sword of Desolation in Yang Sun's hand in horror. Yang Sun had revealed the Sword of Desolation. This meant that he was going to start a massacre. Immediately after, 6 or 7 Wan Jians reacted and rushed into the sky. Boom! At this moment, the Sword of Desolation in Yang Sun's hand slashed across the void. Suddenly, desolate cracks appeared and spread in the void. In the blink of an eye, they covered the entire square in the valley. Ward! Nie Tian's eyes flickered slightly as he sensed a terrifying ward power approaching him. Chapter 33-32. Sword Rhythm. Rumble, rumble, rumble. In the void above the valley, terrifying and desolate cracks, like giant snakes, surged violently. The entire valley was filled with a suffocating aura of desolation. The air was filled with a desolate aura that made people feel like death was approaching. What a terrifying barrier! Nie Tian's eyes trembled and his expression turned ugly. The barrier's power was extremely terrifying and the desolate aura was suffocating. Brat, you're dead. Yang Sun looked at Nie Tian with a sinister expression and the fat on his face trembled. Nie Tian frowned. He felt the desolate cracks in the air were like maggots that were desperately drilling into his body as if they wanted to devour him. Boom! His body shook and a terrifying power surged out from his body. Dragon Chi surged and forcefully forced the desolate cracks out of his body. But at this moment miserable screams sounded. The desolate cracks invaded the bodies of the maids and sword mistresses, and black runes appeared on their bodies. Then, they instantly split open and blood gushed out. Such a scene was extremely tragic and bloody. The desolate barrier was filled with desolate cracks, and it was extremely terrifying. Nie Tian could resist these desolate cracks, but the others couldn't. When Yang Sun activated the barrier, he not only enveloped Nie Tian but also the maids and sword mistresses. Bastard! Nie Tian looked at Yang Sun and roared. Humph humph humph. Yang Sun laughed coldly and didn't care in the slightest. He ruthlessly said, "These female sword maids are like pigs and dogs in this myriad sword's eyes. It is their honor to die in this myriad sword's barrier." Ah! At the end of his speech, Yang Sun actually began to laugh maniacally. His fat face was nauseating. In his eyes, the maids and sword mistresses were indeed no different from pigs and dogs. He could kill them if he wanted to without any hesitation. That's enough. Nie Tian's eyes trembled for a moment. His eyes were filled with a frightening coldness. With a roar, killing intent erupted from his body. Someone like Yang Sun, who was violent and bloodthirsty and had no regard for human life, aroused his intense desire to kill. Ant-like thing, go to hell! At this time, Yang Sun was also furious. His roar was like thunder, and the sword of desolation in his hand pierced through the air. A terrible sword shadow appeared, and the sword body was entwined with terrifying desolation cracks, sweeping towards Nie Tian. Saint heaven-defying sword, earth and man as one, stars and moons sink. However, Nie Tian was not afraid at all. With a low roar, he slashed out with his sword. The sword shadow whistled out and the sword light was released. It was dazzling and the killing intent was sharp. Boom! Immediately after, the two swords clashed against each other, causing the entire space to tremble. A terrifying shockwave rippled out like a tsunami. Suddenly, the cracks in the void became even more violent. The maids and sword mistresses screamed. The air was covered in blood, and the space was covered in a layer of dark red. Damn it! Nie Tian stabilized his body, his countenance incomparably dark. If this continued, these maids would be corroded by the desolation crack. Nie Tian, the world eye is right above his head. At this moment, the Ghost Emperor's voice rang out, reminding Nie Tian. Nie Tian's eyes flashed as he replied. After which, a pair of astral soul wings appeared on his back as he directly unleashed his astral energy. A heaven-shrouding totem appeared, rumbling in the air as a majestic might gushed forth, akin to gigantic tidal waves. In the blink of an eye, the heaven-shrouding totem enveloped all the maids, gathering them together. Smelly brat, you can't even protect yourself and you still want to save others? Yang Sun roared in a low voice, his countenance grim. After which, the sword of desolation frenziedly slashed towards Nie Tian. Nie Tian's eyes narrowed, but he didn't care in the slightest. With a flap of his wings, he resembled a gigantic dragon soaring up into the skies. Swish! In the next instant, his devil eye opened as the extreme devil annihilation imprint transformed into a black-colored blade that pierced towards Yang Sun. Boom! After which, the extreme devil annihilation imprint slammed down, directly tearing a gigantic crack in the world barrier. This is the moment! Nie Tian's eyes trembled as he slashed out with his sword. The sword's shadows were akin to dragons, majestic and majestic, expanding the crack by tens of times. Next, with an intention of his will, the heaven-shrouding totem transformed into a gigantic hand that directly flung everyone out of the world barrier. Bang! But at that moment, the sword of desolation descended and directly bombarded Nye Tion's body. His silhouette was like a broken kite that instantly flew backwards, leaving a trail of blood in the air. At the same time, the world barrier began to close up and was restored in an instant. Nye Tion steadied his body. His entire body was dripping with blood, but his eyes were extremely sharp. He used the extreme devil annihilation imprint to break the world barrier and save the others, but he didn't leave the world. Young man, you really have a chivalrous heart. Yang Sun looked at Nye Tion and sneered. But what's the use of that? Do you think those pigs and dogs can live after leaving the world barrier? After I, Wan Jian, kill you, I will kill them all. Is that so? Nye Tianling laughed. His body shook and the blood on his body disappeared. His aura once again became fierce. His eyes were filled with killing intent as he stared at Yang Sun. Unfortunately, you won't be able to walk out of this world today. Yang Sun was stunned for a moment. His face couldn't help but sink, and his heart was filled with shock. Nye Tian took a blow from him head-on, but he was completely fine. How was this possible? How could Nye Tian's martial physique be so strong to this extent? Moreover, he discovered that Nye Tian wasn't afraid of his desolation imprint at all. It was very strange. Just now, Nye Tian indeed took a blow from Yang Sun head-on, but his martial physique was strong, and with the protection of the heaven-shrouding totem and the wings of astral soul, he didn't suffer any serious injuries. The most terrifying thing was, after the heaven-shrouding runes were unsealed, Nye Tian's recovery speed was even more shocking. It was several times stronger than before. Stinking brat, your strength has indeed exceeded Wan Jian's expectations. But now you still have to die. Then Yang Sun calmed down. His cold eyes trembled as he spoke in a low voice. His expression was extremely cold. The terror of a sword-rhythm swordsman is not something you ants can imagine. Then Yang Sun roared. The desolation imprint in his hand flowed with a mysterious power. The aura was extremely terrifying, and the heaven and earth trembled. The power of the sword rhythm. The other Wan Jian in the sky looked at Yang Sun and shouted in horror. Yang Sun actually used the power of the sword rhythm to kill a swordsman with the divine sword physique. The most terrifying thing about a sword rhythm swordsman was the power of the sword rhythm. It was a kind of power that could increase the power of the sword intent by several times. However, every time the sword rhythm was used, it would cause a certain impact on the swordsman's martial physique. Therefore, under normal circumstances, sword rhythm swordsmen rarely used the sword rhythm. But at this moment, in order to kill Nye Tian, Yang Sun actually planned to use the sword rhythm. Come on! At this moment, Nye Tian let out a low roar. The celestial evolution sacred power in his body surged crazily. His body actually emitted a sword cry, as if Wan Jian was roaring. Outside his body, the sword intent surged crazily and shot up to the sky. A terrifying sword light was released, making his entire body look like an unsheathed sharp sword. Chapter 33-33. A violent battle, boom. Nye Tian took a step forward as his sword chi soared to the skies. The sword chi around him was vigorous and sharp, like a tsunami. His aura shook the heavens and earth. He was already at the transcendent God sword body. Under the stimulation of the celestial evolution Saint Force, his sword Tao had reached the transcendent God esoteric realm. This kid is so strong. The eyes of the crowd trembled. They could feel the undulations of Nye Tian's sword chi through the barrier, causing them to be shocked. Kid, I have underestimated you. Yang Sun roared, the killing intent in his eyes intensified. The sword of desolation in his hand slashed out, and a crack appeared in the air. It was like a ghost's hand, trying to envelop Nye Tian. The terrifying crack was incomparably terrifying. It was enveloped by a layer of dark light. It was the sword chi. The appearance of the sword chi caused the strength of Yang Sun's sword chi to increase by several folds. It was incomparably sharp, and the chi of desolation enveloped the entire barrier. 9 limits of starry sky, sun annihilation. Nie Tian frowned. He slashed out with the starry sky slash. His sword chi condensed in the air, and a terrifying sword shadow appeared, slashing towards the crack. Boom! In the air, a terrifying sound rang out. Under the impact of the crack, the sword shadow in the air shattered. The space trembled violently, as though it was about to collapse. Nie Tian felt a violent strangling force rushing towards him. He narrowed his eyes and retreated. Humph humph. At this moment, Yang Sun laughed coldly and shouted, "Die!" The sword of desolation slashed through the air, and a dazzling ray of desolation appeared. It was extremely terrifying, as though it wanted to tear everything apart. It was aimed at Nie Tian. Nie Tian frowned. He forcefully struck out with his sword, and a pair of astral soul wings appeared on his back. He retreated once again. Pooh! Unfortunately, he was still a step too late. The terrifying desolation light fell and left a terrible wound on his chest. Blood gushed out and instantly dyed his body red. He steadied his body and immediately felt a tearing pain all over his body. A terrifying force rushed into his martial body as if it wanted to tear him apart. It's the power of sword rhythm. The Ghost Emperor immediately sensed that something was wrong and roared, feeling extremely nervous. Nie Tian was injured by the power of desolation, and the power of the sword charm invaded his martial body. The power of the sword rhyme was extremely violent. Nie Tian was only a transcendent swordsman, so he could not withstand it at all. It was like a swordsman with a lower realm being stabbed by a swordsman with a higher realm. Once the sword chi entered the body, it was highly likely that the swordsman would explode and die. With Nie Tian's current realm, it was not easy for him to force out the sword rhythm. He would need to exhaust a large amount of sword intent. Let me force out the sword rhythm. At that moment, Liolio's voice suddenly sounded. Then, Nie Tian's forehead flickered and a white light was released. Then, waves of the power of heaven's punishment surged out of his body. Aha! The double impact of the power of heaven's punishment and the power of the sword rhythm spread out. Even Nie Tian let out a muffled groan and his expression turned very ugly. Boom! However, in the next moment, he directly forced out the power of the sword rhythm and his expression turned better. How is this possible? Yang Sun was stunned by the scene in front of him and his expression turned very ugly. He could not believe that Nie Tian had actually forced out the power of the sword rhythm. The silver-haired swordsman in front of him was even more terrifying than he had imagined. The power of the sword rhythm in the sage realm is indeed terrifying. After Nie Tian recovered, his eyes trembled slightly and he said coldly, "However, this kind of power is not enough to kill me. Yang Sun, what else do you have? Just use it. You still dare to be arrogant in the face of death. Brat, today, the boundary of the Wanjian will be your grave." Yang Sun shouted angrily. Suddenly, the sword of desolation was released crazily and condensed on the sword of desolation, causing the aura of the sword of desolation to become more and more terrifying. Boom! Yang Sun shook the sword of desolation. Suddenly, a vast and boundless aura of desolation was released and filled the entire boundary, causing the power of desolation in the boundary to become even more intense and suffocating. Is that all? Nie Tian's eyes narrowed slightly and the corner of his mouth twitched into a disdainful sneer. How could he not see that Yang Sun was secretly accumulating the power of the sword, preparing for the next attack to erupt with a terrifying attack? However, he was not afraid because he was also accumulating the power of the sword. Arrogant brat, die! Yang Sun roared angrily and slashed out with the sword of desolation. Suddenly, the roaring sword of desolation burst out, causing the void to tremble. The entire world seemed to be submerged by the power of desolation. Boom, boom, boom. In the void, waves of terrifying power collided, and the roaring sound of the explosion could be heard continuously. It was as if the entire world was going to wither and die. Feeling the suffocating aura in the void, Nyetian frowned slightly, but his eyes were extremely firm. He said coldly, "How can such power kill me? Sacred heaven-defying sword, earth and man as one, stars and moons sink." In the next instant, he roared as the energy in his body erupted forth like a wild beast, frenziedly fluctuating in the air. After that, a gigantic sword shadow broke through the air, akin to a primordial beast rushing out from the raging waves. The terrifying aura it exuded was enough to devour and suppress everything. In the sky, everyone looked at the boundary with a dull expression. They were so shocked that they could not speak. Originally, they thought that Yang Sun would be able to kill Nyetian as easily as crushing an ant. They did not expect that the battle would end up like this. Yang Sun only had a slight advantage, but Nyetian's martial body was so strong that it made people's hair stand on end. It was as if he could not be killed. With this extremely strong martial body, Nyetian was testing the limits of Yang Sun's strength little by little. Boom, boom, boom. At this moment, the Desolation sword will was rumbling in the air. It was like a terrifying ocean that was rushing towards Lin Fan. That terrifying sword shadow rushed into it. Chi chi chi. Then, the two forces collided with each other, and a terrible sound of collision could be heard. In the void, small cracks appeared, as if the void was going to collapse at any time. "Little ant, with your strength, how can you go against me?" Yang Sun roared, the sword of desolation rolled unceasingly, and a monstrous aura rushed out, forming a terrible pressure in the air, suppressing everything. "Not only will I go against you, I will also step on you." In the endless chaos of space, Nyetian's voice sounded. It was incomparably domineering. At this moment, Yang Sun suddenly felt a terrifying force appear, causing his eyes to tremble and his expression to become dull. "What is that?" The people in the sky also felt that something was wrong, their eyes trembled violently and they shouted. In the next moment, a shocking scene happened. Boom! Within the barrier, an extremely powerful will gushed forth, extending into the surrounding space. After that, a gigantic silhouette appeared. This silhouette was over 10,000 meters tall, towering between the heavens and the earth, resembling an ancient devil, exuding a towering aura. "It's a silhouette!" Everyone looked at the huge silhouette, their eyes trembled, they were all extremely shocked. Chapter 33-34. "I'm gonna step on you." Boom! Nyetian activated his Celestial Evolution Sacred Body. Waves of Celestial Evolution Sacred Power surrounded his body. It was extremely terrifying. The eyes of the Sky Evolution Sacred Body were like the sun and moon, releasing a terrifying light. It was as if flames were burning, and a powerful and domineering aura spread throughout the entire enchantment. Boom! In the next moment, the aura of the Sky Evolution Holy Body was released. It forcefully broke through the barren sword will. The Sky Evolution Sacred Body was formed from the Sky Evolution Sacred Soul. The Sky Evolution Sacred Soul was one of the 9 ancient sacred souls. It was definitely one of the strongest souls in the world. Once this kind of soul power was released, it was enough to shake heaven and earth. Bang! Immediately after, Yang Sun felt a terrifying force appear, and his figure shook as he was pushed back hundreds of meters. "Kid, what kind of power is this?" Yang Sun steadied himself, and his eyes trembled violently. He could feel that the power flowing through the Sky Evolution Saint Body was no weaker than his sword aura. In fact, the majestic aura of the Sky Evolution Saint Soul was actually able to suppress his Desolation sword will and the sword aura. However, Nyetian was clearly an 8th order pseudo-saint. How could he release such terrifying power? "Enough strength for me to step on you." Nyetianling laughed. His eyes were as dark as the abyss, and the power of the gods and demons surged around him, making him look like a demon god who had walked out of hell. Impudent! Yang Sun was enraged. He let out a roar as his aura gushed forth, after which waves of desolate energy condensed in his hands. At this moment, an extremely dark and terrifying power appeared outside his body. Bloodline power! Nie Tian's eyes narrowed. He immediately understood that Yang Sun had started to use his bloodline power. Everyone's eyes were trembling. They couldn't believe their eyes. Not only had Nie Tian forced Yang Sun to use his sword rhyme power, but the latter had also used his bloodline power. An 8th stage pseudo-saint martial artist was actually this powerful. It was truly inconceivable. Boom boom boom. A terrifying bloodline power was released from Yang Sun's body, circulating in the void, causing the void to continuously emit violent sounds. Looking at Yang Sun, Nie Tian couldn't help but frown as he thought to himself. His sword intent has become much stronger after being stimulated by his bloodline power. Stinking brat, you can die without regrets for forcing me, Wan Jian, to use the power of my bloodline. Yang Sun roared. The power of his bloodline condensed on his palm, forming a dark vortex that contained the power of desolation that could devour everything. Yang Sun's bloodline power was the desolate bloodline, which was interlinked with the desolate sword intent that he cultivated. It greatly enhanced the desolate sword intent. Moreover, the desolate bloodline was very tyrannical. Once it was released, it would cause a strong weakening of a martial artist, just like Duguni's 100 virtual body. However, the desolate bloodline was much more domineering and powerful than the 100 virtual body. Since Yang Sun had even used the power of his bloodline, it meant that he was determined to kill Nie Tian. It's not certain who will live and who will die. It's just the power of my bloodline. Do you think I don't have it? Nie Tianling laughed. Then, the divine demon power surged out of his body, making him look even more violent. Humph! You're just an ant from a territory. Your bloodline power is nothing. Yang Sun laughed coldly. Then, he raised the sword of desolation in his hand. A shocking aura of desolation spread out and the space was suddenly filled with a murderous and destructive power. Die! Then, the sword of desolation fell and a terrifying desolate sword shadow appeared. It tore through the void and pressed down on the sky evolution holy body. Nie Tian's eyes darkened slightly. The divine demon power in his body suddenly surged out and merged with the sky evolution holy body. Boom! The sky evolution holy body merged with the divine demon power and his aura suddenly soared. He was like a demon god, releasing a supreme demonic aura. In the next moment, the sky evolution holy body punched the desolate sword shadow in the air. Boom boom boom. Then, the desolate sword shadow and the sky evolution holy body collided. The power of desolation and the sky evolution holy power exploded at the same time. The terrifying power of the bloodline clashed with each other and turned into a destructive force in the void. It spread in all directions as if it wanted to drown everything. Boom boom boom. A series of muffled explosions rang out. All kinds of terrifying powers collided with each other. They swallowed each other and collided with each other, forming wild waves in the air and dazzling light. The void trembled as if it was going to collapse at any moment. Yang Sun, I will step on you today. At that moment, in the chaotic space, Nie Tian's angry roar rang out. Then, he rushed over like a light blade towards Yang Sun. Huh! Yang Sun was stunned. He could not help but tremble. He did not expect Nie Tian to be so ferocious. Under the wild waves, Nie Tian was not afraid at all. Instead, he rushed over. The strength of his martial body was unimaginable. Lunatic! Seeing Nie Tian's figure approaching, Yang Sun felt a terrifying pressure. He immediately roared and started to retreat. Although Nie Tian was only an 8th-rank pseudo-sage, he could feel that Nie Tian's martial body was far stronger than his. If they fought head-on, he would definitely be the one at a disadvantage. Are you afraid? Nie Tian stood in the air, allowing the terrifying power to attack his martial body. His aura became even more ferocious, and a pair of astral soul wings appeared on his back. His speed suddenly increased as he flew towards Yang Sun. Boom! In the next moment, he arrived above Yang Sun's head and directly stepped down. He was really going to step on Yang Sun. How dare you! Yang Sun's eyes trembled. He felt a violent force pressing down on him. His face instantly turned ugly. At that moment, Nie Tian's foot had already landed on his head. You! Yang Sun spat out a mouthful of blood. His eyes trembled uncontrollably. He couldn't believe that he was really being stepped on by Nie Tian. With a cold laugh, Nie Tian said, "Aren't people like you, who think you're high and mighty, just as lowly when you're being humiliated?" Then, he stomped his foot down again, looking extremely arrogant and violent. Bang! A muffled sound rang out in the air. Yang Sun's figure was directly sent flying and fell straight to the ground. The crowd in the air was completely dumbfounded. Their expressions stiffened and they were speechless. The maidservants and sword mistresses naturally didn't expect that the young swordsman who risked his life to save them would actually be so powerful. It turned out that the high and mighty Yang Sun was only SOSO. As for the experts of the Wan Jian Alliance, they were even more dumbfounded. All of them had expressions of disbelief on their faces. Yang Sun, the most ferocious swordsman in the sky, was actually being stepped on by a swordfish. This was simply a joke. However, this huge joke had really happened in front of them. Chapter 33-35. I must kill. Boom! In the air, Nie Tian descended and stepped on Yang Sun's head, causing the air to tremble. Spurt! After a muffled sound, Yang Sun's body trembled and he spat out a mouthful of blood. He was like a cannonball smashing into the ground. Boom! On the ground there was a huge rumble. Yang Sun had smashed a huge pit, and half of his body had sunk deep into the ground. At this moment, Nie Tian's figure descended like a huge boulder. His foot directly stepped on Yang Sun's neck in an arrogant and domineering manner. You! Yang Sun's eyes trembled. He was so shocked that he could not speak. His entire body was already dripping with blood, and his face was crooked to the point that it was almost impossible to tell that he was human. Originally, he and Nie Tian had been fighting against each other. However, in the blink of an eye, Nie Tian had charged over, and the situation had taken a turn for the worse. Before he could even react, he had been trampled under Nie Tian's foot. His body was in extreme pain and blood flowed everywhere. He was in an extremely sorry state. However, compared to that, what he could not accept even more was that he was stepped on by Nie Tian. He was a cultivator from the Holy World. He was the mighty Wan Jian. He was a swordsman of the charm of swords. He was a supreme existence that ruled over everything. However, at this moment, his head was stepped on by Nie Tian. He could not even speak. This humiliation, this trampling on his dignity, was something he could not accept. At this moment, he stared at Nie Tian with bloodshot eyes. He was tempted to skin Nie Tian alive, cut him into pieces, and grind his bones into dust. Originally, Nie Tian was an ant-like existence in his eyes. However, he was being stepped on by an ant-like existence. This humiliation almost drove him mad. This guy is so ruthless. Up in the sky, the experts of the 10,000 Swords sect sucked in a breath of cold air as they looked at the enraged Nie Tian. When their eyes met Nie Tian's, they felt a chill run down their spines, and their eyes flickered with fear. Nie Tian had long seen that Inspector Yang was violent and opinionated. Therefore, he directly stepped on Yang Sun's head and completely crushed his mentality. This psychological blow was crueler than any torture. Yang Sun, I'm stepping on your head. Where is your arrogance? Where is your pride? Where's your self-righteous dignity? At this time, Nie Tian suddenly exerted force with his feet, and with a furious roar, Yang Sun's entire body sank into the ground. Yang Sun's eyes trembled. His eyes bulged out from the pressure, as if they were about to pop out of his eye sockets. His entire face was completely distorted and collapsed. It was extremely tragic. However, his consciousness was incomparably clear, allowing him to truly feel the humiliation at this moment. At some point, his gaze looked towards the 7 or 8 Wan Jian martial practitioners in the sky, as if seeking help. However, these people who were usually respectful to him and called him brothers were indifferent at this time. They had no intention of making a move at all. These Wan Jian martial practitioners were all Sage Realm swordsmen at the sword rhythm boundary. If they attacked together, Nie Tian would not be able to withstand it at all. However, they did not dare to make a move. On one hand, they were shocked by Nie Tian's strength. They felt that if they attacked alone, they could not defeat Nie Tian at all. On the other hand, more importantly, they felt that there must be an expert behind Nie Tian. Otherwise, Nie Tian would not dare to find Yang Sun so arrogantly. They even thought that Nie Tian might be a martial practitioner from some holy realm. Otherwise, his strength could not be so freakish. They absolutely did not believe that a realm martial practitioner could have such strength at such a young age. After considering all these factors, they did not dare to make a move. Yang Sun, let me ask you now, where are my friends? Nie Tianling asked coldly. He naturally did not forget that he had come here to find Mo Qianjun and Jiu Qiansheng. They're dead. Yang Sun felt slightly relieved. However, he still had a fierce expression on his face as he roared furiously. He had been humiliated by Nie Tian, but the latter still wanted to find out the whereabouts of Mo Qianjun and Jiu Qiansheng. Wishful thinking. You have so much backbone, huh? Nie Tian's eyes darkened. Cold light surged in his eyes as he said coldly, I want to see just how much backbone you have. After saying that, he willed the bone-eroding soul shackling chain to appear and pierce through Yang Sun's chest. Ah! The sudden pain caused Yang Sun to howl miserably. His shrill cry was incomparably tragic. The bone-eroding soul shackling chain could corrode bones and refine soul power. It directly pierced through Yang Sun's chest and tore through his martial body, making him feel as if his body and soul were being torn apart. This kind of terrifying torture was absolutely not something an ordinary person could endure. Many of the female attendants and female swordsmen closed their eyes when they saw this scene. They did not dare to watch. They had never imagined that Nie Tian, who had just saved their lives, would have such a cruel side to him. Nie Tian, on the other hand, had a cold smile on his face. His eyes flashed with a cold light. Nie Tian would not think that a scumbag like Yang Sun would go overboard no matter what he did. Yang Sun, you still have one more chance to speak. Cherish it. Nie Tian said again. The murderous intent in his eyes was on the verge of bursting out. He was not threatening Yang Sun. He had already made up his mind to kill him. Regardless of whether Yang Sun revealed Mo Qianjun and Jiu Qiansheng's whereabouts, Nie Tian was going to kill him. Nie Tian would not be able to quell the anger in his heart if he did not kill such a scumbag. I'll speak. Yang Sun felt the bone-eroding soul shackling chains stop moving. The corners of his mouth twitched and his eyes started to tear up. He had really been beaten to tears by Nie Tian. They are in the secret chamber here. Yang Sun's eyes were trembling as he spoke with difficulty. What secret chamber? Nie Tian frowned and said in a cold tone. Right behind you. Yang Sun struggled to speak. Every word he said was very difficult. Oh! Nie Tian's eyes narrowed. He turned around and saw a hidden stone door behind him. It turned out that there was a secret chamber in this valley. Very good. Nie Tianling laughed. His eyes flickered with a cold light as he looked at Yang Sun and said, You are useless now. Die with your humiliation. After saying that, he suddenly lifted his foot. The power of his physical body instantly exploded. In the next moment, if his foot landed, Yang Sun would be crushed into a pile of minced meat. Don't kill him! However, at this moment, a low roar suddenly rang out in the air. After that, a terrifying sword intent appeared, piercing through the air with extreme sharpness. Lord Sixth Sky. The Wan Jian powerhouses in the sky reacted immediately. They looked at the void and saw a figure speeding towards them. It was the Sixth Sky. I must kill him. Nie Tian lifted his head and looked at the Sixth Sky. The corners of his mouth twitched, and he said in a cold tone. He lifted his foot and brought it down. Bang! As his foot landed, there was a muffled sound in the air. Suddenly, a tragic and bloody scene took place. The ground was covered in blood. Chapter 33-36. Chapter 331. Chapter 331. Shouldn't he be killed? Nie Tian directly stomped Yang Sun to death. His eyes were filled with a cold light, and his entire body circulated with the power of gods and demons, causing his demonic energy to soar into the sky, making him look extremely terrifying. Everyone's eyes trembled uncontrollably. Their expressions were sluggish as they stared at the bloody scene on the ground in disbelief. The scene was dead silent. Only the whistling of the wind made the atmosphere even more gloomy and oppressive. The sixth Haotian's figure suddenly descended. His eyes were fixed on Nie Tian, and his face was filled with shock. It was as if he had seen something extremely terrifying, and he couldn't speak for a long time. He killed Yang Sun. He really killed Yang Sun. After a long time, someone in the sky reacted and shouted as if he had gone mad. It was as if Yang Sun's death was the end of the world for them. The maids and sword mistresses were trembling in fear. They did not dare to make any noise, not even daring to breathe loudly. Nie Tian's gaze swept across everyone, but his expression was very calm, without the slightest hint of nervousness. In his opinion, Yang Sun was a scum. So what if he was killed? There was nothing to be surprised about. Nie Tian, why did you kill him? At that moment, Sixth Sky's eyes suddenly darkened, and he let out a low roar. He was clearly enraged. His eyes were like sharp swords, as if he wanted to pierce through Nie Tian. When he heard that Nie Tian was looking for Yang Sun, he immediately rushed over. However, he didn't expect that he was still a step too late. He had rushed over with all his might to save Nie Tian, but the scene in front of him had greatly exceeded his expectations. It turned out that the person he needed to worry about was not Nie Tian, but Yang Sun. He was afraid that Nie Tian would die, but Yang Sun's death was even more serious. Shouldn't scum like him be killed? Nie Tian looked at the Sixth Sky, his eyes calm and cold. He didn't understand why the Sixth Sky was so nervous now that Yang Sun was dead. Even if Yang Sun was Wan Jian, the Sixth Sky shouldn't be so nervous. Do you know who he is? Sixth Sky's rage soared to the heavens as he roared like thunder. His aura burst forth as a terrifying sword light shot out, slamming into the valley, causing the entire valley to tremble as if it was about to collapse. I don't know who he is, but I know that he has no regard for human life and hurt my friend. He deserves to die. Nie Tian frowned. He had a bad feeling about this, but he still replied solemnly. You. Sixth Sky's eyes trembled, and he was speechless. Nie Tian, do you know how much trouble you've caused? After a while, the Sixth Sky sighed with an extremely dejected expression. The reason why Yang Sun dared to throw his weight around in the Sky Sword Martial competition was not because of his identity as Wan Jian, but because he had a father who was a guardian of the sky. Everyone in the Sky Sword Martial School knew that Yang Sun was backed by an expert. However, there were very few people who knew who was behind Yang Sun. Sixth Sky, of course, knew Yang Sun's identity. Otherwise, he wouldn't have let Yang Sun go. Now that Nie Tian had killed Yang Sun, the Sixth Sky was in a dilemma. Yang Sun's father was called Yang Gungri. He was ranked second among the 7 guardians of the sky. He was extremely powerful and extremely protective. His son had died in the 6th Sword Mountain group. Not only would Nye Tian be in trouble, but the 6th Sky would also be in trouble. The Sky Sword Martial School was divided into 6 Sword Mountain group. Each Sky was in charge of a Sword Mountain group. The 6th Sky was in charge of the 6th Sword Mountain group. Yang Sun had died in front of the 6th Sky, so Yang Gengri would definitely cause trouble for the 6th Sky. Lord 6th Sky, in my heart there is only right and wrong. There is no distinction. Nye Tian had already guessed that Yang Sun's identity was very terrifying, but he was still very calm. He said lightly, as the saying goes, if a prince breaks the law, he will be punished the same as a commoner. No matter how high Yang Sun's status is, he shouldn't have killed at will. If I had known his identity in advance, I would have killed him all the same, because he deserves to be killed. The 6th Sky's face darkened slightly. He looked at Nye Tian and his heart trembled. He saw himself in Nye Tian when he was young. The current Nye Tian was like a sword, showing off his abilities. 6th Haotian was silent for a while. Suddenly, his gaze turned cold. He swept his gaze over everyone and finally focused on the 10,000 swords. He said coldly, "No one is allowed to say a word about what happened here today. Otherwise..." Swoosh! A cold light flashed in the 6th Sky's eyes. A ray of sword essence whizzed out and shot into a mountain wall like a sharp blade. Rumble, rumble, rumble. Everyone's eyes widened. Immediately after, the mountain wall actually split into 2 halves. This! Everyone's eyes suddenly froze and they all gasped. Horror was written all over their faces. The 6th Sky had only released a ray of sword essence, but it had split a mountain into 2 halves. Such strength was shocking. Such a strong sword intent. Nye Tian's pupils constricted as he was shocked. 6th Haotian's sword intent was many times stronger than Yang Sun's. They couldn't be mentioned in the same breath. Nye Tian guessed that the 6th Sky's sword principle had most likely reached the 2nd stage of the Sage stage, the Oracle stage. Yes, yes, yes. We definitely won't say a word. At this time, the Wan Jian immediately lowered their heads and said yes. Their faces were pale, and they didn't even dare to look at the 6th Sky. Obviously, the 6th Sky was trying to protect Nye Tian. This made the Wan Jian even more certain that Nye Tian was not to be trifled with. Listen up, today's duel was a normal duel between Nye Tian and Yang Sun. Yang Sun was defeated and killed. His position as the Wan Jian will be inherited by Nye Tian. The 6th Sky said in a threatening tone. In the Sky Sword Principle, any swordsman could challenge someone who was more powerful than him. As long as you could kill that person, you could inherit his position. The 6th Sky said that Nye Tian had killed Yang Sun as a normal duel. Obviously, he was using the rules of the Sky Sword Principle to protect Nye Tian. Upon hearing Haotian's words, Nye Tian couldn't help but be taken aback. He didn't expect that the 6th Sky would protect him like this. What surprised him even more was that the 6th Sky wanted him to inherit Yang Sun's position as the Wan Jian. In this way, Nye Tian had changed from a swordfish to a Wan Jian. He was definitely the fastest person to become a Wan Jian in the history of the Sky Sword Principle. The Wan Jian's eyes were trembling, and their faces were gloomy. They didn't dare to speak and just nodded. At this time, they certainly didn't dare to disobey the 6th Sky. The 6th Sky's cold eyes swept across everyone. His face was so gloomy that it was frightening. Everyone could clearly feel the threatening aura, and it was suffocating. Nye Tian, you've recovered well, and your level of swordsmanship has improved. This is beyond my expectation. After a while, the 6th Sky suddenly looked at Nye Tian and said in a deep voice, "It seems that our duel will be brought forward." "Sure, when?" Nye Tian smiled faintly. He was also looking forward to the duel with the 6th Sky. He wanted to see how terrifying the control of the sword will of a swordsman in the Oracle realm was. Chapter 33-37. Nie Tion's eyes widened when he heard Sixth Sky mention the word, now. He could not hide the excitement in his eyes. He did not expect Sixth Sky to challenge him to a duel. Although he was injured, it did not affect him too much. Most importantly, he wanted to see just how strong the Sixth Haotian's swordsmanship was. Sixth Sky had already displayed the power of his sword intent, which was incomparable to Yang Sun's. Nie Tian speculated that Sixth Sky had most likely reached the second stage of Sacred Sword Principle, the Oracle stage. It was a learning opportunity for Nie Tian to fight against a swordsman at such a stage. Furthermore, he knew that Sixth Haotian didn't really want to fight him. Instead, he wanted to test his strength. Master Sixth Sky, we'll take our leave. The Wanjians bowed slightly and were about to leave. They believed that Sixth Sky did not want anyone to witness the duel. No need, you guys stay here and watch the duel, Sixth Sky said in a deep voice, not allowing the Wanjians to leave. Yes. The Wanjians were confused, but they nodded immediately with joy in their eyes. They also wanted to see just how strong the sixth vast heaven was. Nie Tian, let's begin. Sixth Sky's eyes narrowed slightly. He came to the sky and said calmly. As soon as he finished speaking, a mystical aura of sword intent appeared on his body and circulated around his body. It was able to greatly suppress his sword intent. Thank you, Lord Sixth Haotian, for sealing your sword intent. With a faint smile, Nie Tian blurred into action and flew into midair. QL11 The mysterious sword intent around Sixth Haotian was used to seal his own sword intent. He had mentioned that he would suppress his sword intent to the same level as Nie Tian's in the duel. Make your move. Number 6 stood in the sky with his hands clasped behind his back. The sword will in his body was condensed, but his aura was getting sharper and sharper. The sharpness of his aura was extremely terrifying. Nie Tian looked at Sixth Haotian and said with a faint smile, Lord Sixth Haotian, I'm already at the Transcendent Sword Body stage. You can raise your sword intent to the Transcendent Sword Body stage. The sword intent aura in the Sixth Sky had actually been suppressed to the Transcendent Soul Shocking Realm, which was one realm lower than Nie Tian's. When I challenged you, you were only at the Transcendent Sword Soul level. Therefore, my current realm is suppressed to the Transcendent Sword Soul. The Sixth Sky looked calm and said, Moreover, you have just fought with Yang Sun and are already injured. If I, the Sky, were to fight you with the ultimate divine sword body, wouldn't I be bullying you? If that's the case, then I won't hold back. Nie Tian laughed and his lips curled into a fierce smile. The Sixth Sky was a senior expert. Since he was so confident, he must have something to rely on. Therefore, it was unnecessary for Nie Tian to worry about him. Yes. The Sixth Sky nodded. He looked calm and didn't seem to be panicking at all. 9 limits of starry sky, heaven slash. At that moment, the sword aura around Nie Tian rose and he slashed with his sword. A huge sword shadow appeared and pressed down on the Sixth Sky. He was just testing the Sixth Sky with this sword attack. He wanted to see how strong the Sixth Sky was. Sixth Haotian did not move in the slightest in the face of the sword silhouettes that pressed down on him. He stood there like a boulder in a storm, unafraid of any impact. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. Just as the sword shadow was about to fall, the Sixth Sky's figure moved. Then, a dazzling light appeared and turned into countless small sword shadows in the air, forming a rain of swords. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. The next moment the huge sword shadow fell, but it was blocked by the small sword shadows and slowly devoured. In the blink of an eye, Nie Tian's sword shadow was torn to pieces. What he saw caused Nie Tian's face to drop, and his expression to turn extremely grim. The Sixth Sky's strength had far exceeded his expectations. The Sixth Sky had suppressed his sword realm to the Transcendent Sword Soul. Why was his sword will still so strong? At that moment, the Ghost Emperor's voice echoed out. Nie Tian, this man is an expert in the Tao of the sword. His mastery of sword intent is far beyond your imagination. Nie Tian nodded with a solemn expression. Yeah. To be praised by the Ghost Emperor, the sixth sky was undoubtedly powerful. In fact, the strength of a sword will only represented one aspect of a swordsman's strength. The more important aspect was the swordsman's control over sword will. It was just like the same sword in the hands of a healer and a warrior, but the power it could display was completely different. The sixth sky had suppressed his sword realm to the transcendent sword soul, while Nie Tian had the transcendent sword body. Therefore, at this moment, in terms of the strength of sword will, Nie Tian was stronger than the sixth sky. However, the sixth sky's understanding, control, and use of sword will were far beyond Nie Tian's. Your sword will is very strong, but your understanding of sword will is too weak, the sixth sky said coldly as he glanced at Nie Tian. Again, Nie Tian's eyes grew grim as he let out a bellow, and his sword intent burst forth like raging waves, filling the surroundings with a rumble. He had originally thought that his control over the sword will had already reached the acme of perfection. However, compared to sixth Haotian's, he was actually so weak. This did not make him feel discouraged. Instead, it stimulated his fighting spirit. 9 limits of the starry sky, sun extermination. As Nie Tian shouted, the star heavenly slashed across the sky, blossoming with dazzling sword light. In the blink of an eye, strands of sword intent converged and morphed into a sword shadow that shot towards Haotian. However, the sixth sky still moved. The sky was full of sword shadows, and the air was filled with a terrifying strangling power. It easily dissolved Nie Tian's attack. You have enough momentum, but it's not sharp enough, the sixth sky said calmly. Is that so? Nie Tian's face darkened. His fighting spirit became even stronger. His aura surged wildly as he attacked several times, but the attacks were all easily dissolved by the sixth sky. The sixth Haotian stood there like a strange peak, so high that it was impossible to climb. Nie Tian's sword will surged violently. His eyes flickered with excitement. It was a great opportunity for him to fight against an expert in sword principle like the sixth sky. Even though the sixth Haotian hadn't made a move yet, Nie Tian's understanding of sword intent had already reached a new level. He had thought that he had unleashed the power of sword will to the extreme. However, the sixth sky's control of sword will had given him a new understanding of sword will. Nie Tian, you still have one more chance. At that moment, sixth Haotian spoke indifferently and said in a deep voice, after this sword, it's my turn to attack. Alright. Nie Tian agreed. His eyes trembled, and the sword will in his body surged wildly in an instant. At this moment, he used the celestial evolution sacred power. The sword will aura around him suddenly surged to the extreme. The sword principle realm had broken through to the ultimate god realm. Interesting. The sixth sky looked at Nie Tian and his eyes narrowed. The corner of his mouth twitched into a sharp smile. Chapter 33-38. The sky made his move. The 10,000 peaks of thunder. Sixth Haotian held the Yuan spirit sword in his hand, and a terrifying sword will was released. It was natural yet incomparably sharp, and it filled the entire valley, causing the surrounding space to tremble. It was Nie Tian's first time seeing sixth sky unleashing the Yuan Ling sword. His eyes flickered as he was astonished by his opponent's aura. Even though sixth sky's sword intent was not much different from before, his sword aura was several times stronger after he held the sword. The sword was like a second life for a swordsman. It was not an exaggeration to say that a swordsman with or without a sword in his hand was completely different. However, after sixth sky held the sword, his aura increased tremendously, to the extent that Nie Tian was unable to believe it. Nie Tian, your last slash has allowed me, the sky, to resist your ultimate sword intent with my ultimate sword spirit. Sixth sky looked at Nie Tian with a calm smile. His eyes flickered with excitement. It seemed like he was looking forward to seeing the power of Nietion's next slash. All right. Nietion's eyes flickered with a blazing light. He let out a low roar and gathered his sword intent. The starlight heavenly slash streaked across the sky. Wherever it passed, a dazzling sword light would flash across the sky. Moreover, it contained a terrifyingly fierce offensive power. Nietion did not hold back at all with this slash. This guy, he's so strong. Up in the sky, the eyes of the several experts from the Sword Dao sect flickered as they sensed the might of Nietion's sword strike. Nietion's strength had far exceeded their expectations. It was terrifying. Bring it on. Meanwhile, in the sky, Sixth Sky's expression did not change at all. He was as calm as an ancient well. In the next moment, the thunderous sword in his hand slashed across the sky. Following this, a terrifying sword intent appeared around his body, which instantly formed an enormous sword shield that covered his entire figure like a mountain. In the face of Nietion's all-out attack, Sixth Sky still only defended and did not attack. It wasn't that he looked down on Nietion, but he had complete confidence in his own strength. Rumble. Hum. At this moment, Nietion's sword fell down and landed on the sword shield in the Sixth Sky. The air rumbled and then the space suddenly sank, making a low muffled sound. The sword shadow stagnated in the air and couldn't advance any further. The sword and shield around Sixth Haotian seemed ordinary and unremarkable, but they contained an extremely terrifying power. Furthermore, the power of the sword intent was completely unleashed in his hands, causing the defensive power of the sword shield to be extremely terrifying. Even if Nietion attacked with all his strength, he would not be able to break the sword shield. Nietion's eyes narrowed and his face turned pale. He had already reached the transcending God ultimacy stage. Why was it still so difficult for him to fight against Sixth Sky, who had reached the transcending God sword soul stage? Just how terrifying was Sixth Haotian's control over sword will? Nietion, your sword intent is very strong, but it's not enough to amaze me. Sixth Sky laughed and said calmly, but his voice was filled with arrogance. Is that so? Nietion's eyes suddenly darkened. The sword intent in his body suddenly increased again, and streams of sword intent were forcibly injected into the sword shadow, causing the surrounding space to tremble violently. Crack! At this moment, a crisp sound was heard. A crack appeared on the sword shield. Sixth Sky's eyes narrowed and his expression changed. Nietion had actually torn his sword shield apart with his sword intent. Crack, crack, crack. However, the situation suddenly changed. The crack directly spread, and the crack on the sword shield instantly expanded, as if it would collapse in the next moment. How is this possible? When the people above saw this scene, their eyes trembled violently, and they could not believe their eyes. Nietion was really going to break Sixth Sky's sword shield. Boom! Then, in the midst of everyone's astonishment, a loud explosion sounded out as the sword shield shattered into pieces. Sixth Sky's eyes narrowed, and for the first time, a look of panic appeared on his face. He felt a strong oppressive force falling, shrouding him, trying to suppress him directly. Such a scene was something that he had never imagined, so he was incomparably shocked. But after all, he was a swordsman in the Oracle realm. He regained his composure in an instant. With a thought, sword wings condensed from sword shadows appeared behind him, and he moved in a flash, retreating backward. Boom! His reaction was fast, but he was still a bit too slow. The sword shadow suddenly fell, stirring up terrible waves in the void, rushing around. Bang! Sixth Sky's figure was hit, and he retreated thousands of meters, but then he stood firmly. He was not injured, but he looked very embarrassed. Everyone's eyes were focused on Sixth Sky, and their expressions were filled with disbelief and shock. No one had expected that Nietion would be able to force Sixth Haotian into such a desperate situation. The fact that Nie Tian had killed Yang Sun in such a domineering manner shocked everyone even more. But at this time, Nie Tian's face was as pale as a piece of paper. That sword attack just now had consumed too much of his strength. Nie Tian, you have amazed me, Sky. At this time, Sixth Sky opened his mouth. His eyes were as sharp as swords, staring at Nie Tian. Next, it's my turn, Sky. Bring it on. Nie Tian took a deep breath and said in a deep voice. He was exhausted, but he did not retreat. He was confident that with his swordsmanship strength and strong martial body, he would be able to resist Sixth Sky's attack. I, Haotian, will only attack once. You better watch carefully. Sixth Sky twitched the corner of his mouth and raised the 10,000 peaks of thunder high. Sword of 10,000 peaks, roar of thunder. Roar. As soon as he finished speaking, he stabbed out with his sword. A gust of sword essence whistled out and condensed into a thunder beast in the air. With a roar, it pressed down on Nie Tian. Nie Tian's eyes narrowed slightly. The pressure he felt in an instant almost suffocated him. The monstrous momentum that Sixth Sky's sword attack seemed to be able to suppress everything. It was extremely terrifying. Since you have condensed the sword essence into a beast, I will fight you with my dragon veins. Then, Nie Tian's eyes darkened, and the 9 supreme dragon meridians in his body started to circulate at a crazy speed. Boundless dragon chi was released, and in the middle of the sea of dragon chi, a crimson dragon appeared, emitting a majestic dragon might that shook the world. Boom, boom, boom. The dragon chi was wild and violent. It collided with the void and exploded. Roar! In the next second, the giant crimson dragon let out a violent roar. It rolled its body and pounced at the thunder beast. Boom! The two forces collided with each other, causing the void to tremble. A terrifying explosion was heard and waves of waves appeared in the void. The eyes of the crowd trembled. The shock in their hearts was indescribable. The void became chaotic and only returned to normal after a long time. 2 figures stood in the air. They were Nie Tian and Sixth Sky. Nie Tian's body swayed slightly. He was seriously injured, but his eyes were still sharp. Chapter 33-39. The mysterious Blackstone up in the sky. Sixth Sky had injured Nie Tian with a single slash. However, there was no joy in his eyes, only shock and excitement. Although Nie Tian was injured, he had managed to block his attack. The strength of Nie Tian's sword intent and martial body had far exceeded Sixth Sky's expectation. Nie Tian, you did well. A moment later, Sixth Sky spoke. His deep eyes were filled with a hint of passion as he looked at Nie Tian from afar. Nie Tian took a deep breath. His complexion slightly improved as he bowed and said, "Thank you for showing mercy, Lord Sixth Haotian." Sixth Sky's previous attack was extremely powerful, but it was obviously not his true strength. If Sixth Sky had wanted to kill Nie Tian would have been a corpse by now. You're alive because you're strong. You don't need to thank this Sky. Sixth Sky's lips twitched, revealing a stiff smile. He then looked at the Wan Jian in the sky and said in a loud voice, "The battle between me, Sky, and Nie Tian ended in a draw." A draw? Those people were stunned and their faces were filled with astonishment. In fact, Sixth Sky had the absolute advantage in the current situation. If the battle continued, even if Sixth Sky maintained his ultimate godly sword flesh, Nie Tian would not be able to withstand it. However, Sixth Sky said it was a draw, which made the Wan Jian feel strange. "Now you can leave," Sixth Sky said coldly before they could react. "Farewell." The people were stunned, but they did not have time to think. They bowed and left the place. Sixth Sky clearly wants them to tell the others that the battle between me and him ended in a draw. Nie Tian looked at the figures of Wan Jian and could not help but frown. He thought to himself, is Sixth Sky trying to use this to increase my reputation? If news of his tie with Sixth Sky were to spread, Nie Tian's fame would undoubtedly skyrocket. It seemed that Sixth Sky was doing this to increase Nie Tian's fame. First, he helped Nie Tian suppress the news of him killing Yang Sun. Then, he helped Nie Tian increase his fame. What was this Sixth Sky trying to do? Nie Tian, you can go and save your friend now, said Haotian as he looked at Nie Tian with a confused look on his face. Nie Tian didn't think too much about it. He nodded and entered the secret chamber in the valley. The secret chamber was dark and damp, and the yin qi was extremely dense, giving off a very gloomy feeling. Nie Tian walked along the entrance and saw dungeons on both sides. The murderous aura in the surroundings was very dense. Inside the dungeons were piles of white bones that emitted an evil aura. Soul-burning curse. Nie Tian's eyes narrowed as he looked at the white bones. He could feel the extremely strong soul-burning curse qi. It was obvious that the owners of these white bones had been planted with the soul-burning curse when they were alive, and they had died a horrible death in the dungeons. Nie Tian frowned and sped up. He soon found Mo Qianjun and Jiuqian Xing in one of the dungeons. Brother Nie. Mo Qianjun was in the dungeon. The moment he saw Nie Tian, he shouted excitedly. His eyes were filled with tears. He had not expected that Nie Tian would be able to find them. When he and Jiuqian Xing were captured, they thought they were dead for sure. They never expected to see the light of day again. Brother Jiuqian, you've suffered. Nie Tian saw Mo Qianjun and Jiuqian Xing being pierced by chains. His eyes trembled, and his eyes were filled with anger. He released a sword will and directly blasted the dungeon's door open. As soon as he stepped into the dungeon, Nie Tian could feel the pungent, bloody aura and the thick soul-burning curse qi. His eyes trembled and his face was very unsightly. Mo Qianjun and Jiuqian Xing were pierced by chains. The soul-burning curse qi was carved on the chains, and the power of the curse was constantly seeping into their bodies. Yang Sun had used this method to imprison the two of them, making them endure inhumane torture. Nie Tian's face was gloomy. He only calmed down after a long time. He sensed Mo Qianjun and Jiuqian Xing's aura, then carefully removed the chains for them. Brother Mo, are you all right? Nie Tian asked in a low voice as he supported Mo Qianjun and Jiuqian Xing. Mo Qianjun's aura was still stable. He said nervously, I'm fine. Can you check on Jiuqian Xing? Okay, Nie Tian replied. His divine sense sensed the unconscious Jiuqian Xing, and he couldn't help but frown. 3 days ago, he had forced the soul-burning curse qi out of Jiuqian Xing's body. But now, Jiuqian Xing's body was once again filled with the power of the soul-burning curse qi. Nie Tian took a deep breath. He didn't want others to see this scene. He once again used the power of the heavenly punishment to force the soul-burning curse qi out of Jiuqian Xing's body. Half a day later, Jiuqian Xing woke up, but his consciousness was still chaotic. Then, Nie Tian helped Mo Qianjun force the soul-burning curse qi out. After doing all this, he almost collapsed. Nie Tian, are you all right? Mo Qianjun asked anxiously when he saw Nie Tian's body drenched in cold sweat. I'm fine. Nie Tian nodded slightly. Then, a cold glint flashed in his eyes as he said, I will definitely make the person behind Yang Sun pay the heaviest price. Mo Qianjun and Jiuqian Xing had suffered unimaginable pain, which had all been caused by Yang Sun. However, Yang Sun was obviously just a knife, and there was someone behind him who wielded the knife. Given Yang Sun's strength, it was impossible for him to control the soul-burning curse qi. Hence, there had to be a powerhouse behind him. The fact that the Sixth Sky was so afraid of Yang Sun also proved this point. In the entire sky, there were only 7 great sword martialists who could make the Sixth Sky afraid of Yang Sun. Hence, the mastermind who had attacked Mo Qianjun and Jiuqian Xing had to be one of the 7 great sky protectors. Nie Tian didn't care who this person was. He would definitely make them pay a painful price. The people in the dungeon had obviously been killed by this mastermind. It seemed like this mastermind was conducting some kind of experiment with the soul-burning curse chi. Using swordsmen as an experiment, one could imagine how cruel this person was. It was unknown how many swordsmen in the sky sword martialists had been killed by this person. Following this, Nie Tian carefully examined the secret chambers. He searched the dungeons one by one, hoping to find something valuable. What is this? At this time, he found a small stone platform that looked like an altar in the innermost dungeon. At the center of the stone platform and altar, there was a black stone that looked very strange. The black stone was only the size of a palm and shaped like a goose egg. It was pitch black like the night sky, and its surface was very smooth. It seemed like it had been eroded by some kind of power for a long time. Nie Tian tried to sense the black stone, but he was shocked to discover that when his divine sense entered the black stone, it was as if he had fallen into a bottomless abyss. Ah! He immediately retracted his divine sense. His forehead was already drenched in cold sweat. In just an instant, his divine sense had almost been swallowed by the black stone. What is this thing? Why is it so frightening? Nie Tian's expression suddenly changed, and he felt a lingering fear. Chapter 33:40. Chapter 335. Chapter 335. Being entrusted by someone, eternal night burning God. Nie Tian's eyes narrowed slightly. His expression suddenly changed, and his heart trembled inexplicably. He didn't know what the eternal night burning God was, but his consciousness had almost been devoured just now. This made him extremely fearful of this mysterious black stone. Nie Tian, take the eternal night burning God. Let's leave this place, the ghost emperor said cautiously and nervously. He had calmed down a lot. Okay. Nie Tian didn't ask any questions. He agreed and released a sword intent from his hand, which wrapped the eternal night burning God. Then, he left the secret room. After a while, Nie Tian, Mo Qianjun, and Jiu Qiansheng walked out of the secret room and arrived in the valley. Sixth Sky Master. At this time, he found that the sixth sky was still there. The maids and sword mistresses were also there, waiting for him. Nie Tian, you've finally come out. The sixth sky looked at Nie Tian. His eyes swept over Mo Qianjun and Jiu Qiansheng, and he looked quite surprised. Nie Tian's eyes narrowed slightly as he asked, "Is there anything else, Lord Haotian?" The sixth sky had been waiting for him for half a day. He couldn't have just sighed. Nie Tian, your friends are safe now. I, the sky, have something to tell you. Come with me, the sixth sky said indifferently as his eyes swept over Mo Qianjun and Jiu Qiansheng. Nie Tian frowned. He didn't know what the sixth sky wanted to tell him. He was a little worried about Mo Qianjun and Jiu Qiansheng, so he didn't dare to leave casually. Don't worry. Now that you have the identity of Wan Jian, this valley is yours from now on. Before the sword seal in the sky is opened, no one will dare to cause trouble for you, the sixth sky said cold, as he could tell what Nie Tian was worried about. Okay, let's go. Nie Tian nodded. His figure moved, and he was about to leave with the sixth sky. What do you plan to do with these people? Sixth sky frowned as he looked at the female attendants and sword ladies in the sky. They entered the sky's sword martial arts to hone their swordsmanship, not to be slaves or to be toyed with. Nie Tian narrowed his eyes and said, "From now on, they are no different from other swordsmen." Sixth sky nodded and did not say anything else. Nie Tian didn't say anything else either. He had the maids leave. With his current strength, he could not decide the fate of the entire sky sword martial sect. However, since he was already Wan Jian, he would no longer have any maids or sword mistresses under him. The maids and sword ladies were dumbfounded for a long time before they finally reacted and left with shocked expressions. They didn't expect that Nie Tian would let them go just like that. They had come to the sky sword martial arts to stimulate the swordsmanship of the sword mountain like other swordsmen and use it to cultivate their swordsmanship. After all the maids and sword ladies left, Nie Tian asked Emo Qianjun and Jiuqian Sheng to stay in the valley while he left with the sixth sky. After a while, the figures of the sixth sky and Nie Tian arrived at a hidden valley. Nie Tian, do you know who is behind Yang Sun? The sixth sky did not beat around the bush and asked directly. Nie Tian shook his head. There was no nervousness on his face. He was very calm. Yang Sun's father is Yang Gungri, the guardian of the sky sword martial arts. He is ranked second among the 7 guardians. The sixth sky frowned and said in a deep voice, with his strength, even I, the sky, am like an ant in front of him, let alone you. So the person behind Yang Sun is the guardian of the sky, who is ranked second. No wonder he is so arrogant and dares to act like a tyrant in the sky sword martial arts, Nie Tian said cold as his eyes narrowed slightly. With the support of a guardian for a father, it was no wonder that Yang Sun was so arrogant and tyrannical. Nie Tian, aren't you afraid of Yang Gungri's revenge? The sixth sky looked at Nie Tian and asked with a frown. He originally wanted to remind Nie Tian of Yang Gungri's terrifying power, but he didn't expect Nie Tian to lament. The sixth sky isn't afraid, so why should I be afraid? Nie Tian smiled faintly and the corners of his mouth curled into a strange arc. The sixth sky openly helped Nie Tian, which was undoubtedly going against Yang Gungri. However, the sixth sky wasn't afraid, which was enough to show that he had something to rely on. Although Hao Diwu had warned the 10,000 swords not to divulge what had happened in the valley, his threat was clearly useless. Some of the 10,000 swords would definitely tell Yang Gungri about what had happened. At that time, Yang Gungri would not only want to take revenge on Nie Tian. Nie Tian, you are indeed very smart, the sixth sky said with a gloomy face when he heard Nie Tian's words. The sixth sky, I want to know, why are you helping me? Nie Tian's mouth twitched as he looked at the sixth sky and asked. He didn't believe that the sixth sky could openly go against Yang Gungri just because he admired him. The sixth sky had also said that Yang Gungri could kill him as easily as killing an ant. Helping Nie Tian was equivalent to risking his life. Sixth Haotian looked at Nie Tian, his eyes trembling. After a moment of hesitation, he said, I was entrusted by someone. The intelligence of Nie Tian was far beyond his expectations, which surprised him. Nie Tian's pupils constricted as a surprised expression appeared on his face. Someone entrusted you with this task? The sixth sky's words were so vague that he obviously didn't want to reveal the identity of the person behind it. Throughout the entire sky sword martial, only the guardian of the sky could command the sixth sky. And the only guardian of the sky that Nie Tian knew was eternally merciless. Moreover, it was eternally merciless intention for him to enter the sword martial in the sky. The person behind the sixth sky, could it be eternally merciless? Nie Tian frowned and thought to himself, don't guess, that person doesn't want to show up yet. The sixth sky knew that Nie Tian was guessing, so he said directly, I can only tell you that the person who asked me to protect you is not eternally merciless. Yes. Nie Tian nodded, then he turned his eyes and said, Lord Sixth Sky, you didn't ask me to come here just to tell me this, did you? I have something for you. The sixth sky's eyes flickered, then he took out a scroll and threw it to Nie Tian. Nie Tian grabbed the scroll and sent his divine sense into it. He sensed a very familiar aura, which made his expression flicker involuntarily. He couldn't help but exclaim in astonishment, this aura is the tripartite holy formation. The scroll in his hand was a formation array scroll, and the aura of the formation was clearly the Trinity sacred array. Nie Tian had once practiced cultivation in the tripartite sacred formation. Back when he was in the sacred heaven sword tomb in the abandoned land, he met a star emissary, the sacred heaven ancestor. It was the sacred heaven ancestor who allowed him to enter the Trinity's sacred array and comprehend the sacred heaven-defying sword. At this moment, he actually felt the aura of the Trinity's sacred array in a formation array scroll. How could he not be shocked? The Trinity Sacred Array was a connate sacred array, nurtured by heaven and earth. Why would it appear in a formation array scroll? Chapter 33:41. Chapter 3:36. Eternal Night Burning God Nyetian thought about the Trigree sacred formation and the sacred heaven ancestor, and couldn't help but suspect that the sixth sky in front of him was related to the sacred heaven ancestor. He even felt that the person behind the sixth sky was the sacred heaven ancestor. Back then, the sacred heaven ancestor left behind a sacred heaven sword soul and then left the abandoned land. It was not impossible to say that the sacred heaven ancestor was a protector of the sky. Nyetian, the formation scroll in your hand is not the Trigree sacred formation. While Nyetian was still in shock, the Ghost Emperor opened his mouth and said, "This should be a sword formation scroll. The sword formation inside is derived from the Trigree sacred formation." Not the Trigree sacred formation? Nyetian's eyes became serious after hearing the Ghost Emperor's words and exclaimed. He was just wondering why the Trigree sacred formation would appear on a scroll since it was a natural formation. So it turned out that the scroll in his hand was only a sword formation scroll derived from the Trigree sacred formation. Nyetian, this scroll was given to you by that Great One. I hope that you can use it well and improve your control over the sword intent. At this time, the sixth sky looked at Nyetian and said, "You are the swordsman with the strongest sword intent that this sky has ever seen among swordsmen of the same rank. Your control and usage of the sword intent also far surpasses swordsmen of the same rank, but it is still far from enough. This sword formation can help you improve your understanding of the sword intent, allowing you to control it more freely and unleash more power. Thank you." Nyetian faintly smiled and put the scroll away. However, he was still curious whether the sixth sky and the sacred heaven ancestor were related or not. Although the formation scroll in his hand was not the Trigree sacred formation, it was derived from the Trigree sacred formation. This meant that it was still related to the Trigree sacred formation. If the heavenly ancestor was really the protector of the sky, then it would truly be worth looking forward to. Nyetian, all the guardians are preparing for the opening of the sky sword seal, so you're safe for now. Sixth Sky looked at Nyetian and said, "You have to seize the time to cultivate and improve your strength. On the day that the sword seal in the sky opens, Yanggungri will definitely appear, and very soon, he will find out everything. At that time, the first person he will target will definitely be you." "I understand." Nyetian nodded slightly, his eyes filled with determination. Even in the sky sword martial arts, he was not afraid of any challenge. After leaving the sixth sky, Nyetian quickly returned to the valley. At this point, he had already assumed the identity of Wan Jian. This entire valley was his. Nyetian. Seeing that Nyetian had returned, Mo Qianjun immediately walked over with a worried expression. He didn't know if it was a good or bad thing for the sixth sky to call Nyetian away alone. "Brother Mo, is Jiu Qianxing all right?" Nyetian chuckled and asked Mo Qianjun. "He has calmed down, but his mind is still not clear. I don't know if his divine sense can recover." Mo Qianjun frowned with an ugly expression. He was locked in the dungeon for 3 days and was also affected by the divine burning ghost curse. However, it was only for a short period of time, so the curse couldn't completely devour his divine sense. After Nyetian helped him force out the divine burning ghost curse, his divine sense recovered. However, Jiu Qianxing had been affected by the divine burning ghost curse for a long time, so whether or not his divine sense could recover was still unknown. Nyetian frowned and came next to Jiu Qianxing. The latter had already woken up, but his eyes were empty as if he was a fool. Nyetian's expression was not good. If Jiu Qianxing's divine sense couldn't recover, then what was the point of living? If his divine sense couldn't recover, Jiu Qianxing would be no different from a walking corpse. However, Nie Tian really didn't know how to recover Jiu Qianxing's divine sense. Nie Tian, the eternal night burning god in your hands, is the key to recovering Jiu Qianxing's divine sense. At this moment, the Ghost Emperor's excited voice rang out. Eternal night burning god. Nie Tian's eyes trembled as he immediately took out the mysterious black stone that he had brought out from the secret chamber. The moment the mysterious black stone appeared, an incomparably dark aura was released and filled the space. What a strong mental strength! In an instant, Nie Tian's divine sense felt a terrifying impact, which actually caused his divine sense to tremble. The power released by the eternal night burning god was actually a terrifying mental strength, which had a great impact on divine sense. Emo Qianjuan's body swayed, and his eyes glazed over for a long time before gradually returning to normal. His divine sense wasn't as strong as Nie Tian's. Under the impact of the eternal night burning god, his divine sense almost collapsed. When Nie Tian first saw the eternal night burning god, he had tried to probe it, and his divine sense had almost been devoured. There was no doubt that the eternal night burning god contained extremely strong mental strength. Moments later, Nie Tian calmed down a lot. Looking at the eternal night god of flame, he asked with a frown, "What in the world is this thing?" He really wanted to know what the eternal night burning god contained and how it could contain such a strong mental strength. The eternal night burning god is a heart, the Ghost Emperor replied after a pause. Heart? Nie Tian's eyes trembled as he exclaimed. He never expected the mysterious black stone in his hand to be a heart. Yes. The Ghost Emperor nodded and said, according to the rumors, the eternal night burning god is the heart of one of the 9 ancient beasts, the eternal night demon fox. One of the 9 ancient beasts, the eternal night demon fox. Nie Tian's eyes trembled again when he heard the name. The 9 ancient beasts only exist in the legends. It is said that they are 9 powerful beasts that have the power to destroy the sacred realm. The Ghost Emperor's eyes darkened as he said, the eternal night demon fox is only one of the 9 beasts, but it possesses one of the strongest bloodlines of the beasts, the Burning God bloodline. The Burning God bloodline is an extremely rare mental strength bloodline. The most terrifying thing about this bloodline is that it can devour a person's divine sense in an instant. Nie Tian's eyes flickered when he heard the Ghost Emperor's words, and his expression changed. No wonder his divine sense was almost devoured when he tried to probe the eternal night burning god. However, it was his first time hearing about a mental strength bloodline. All the bloodlines he had seen before were bloodlines that could increase one's martial strength. There was no bloodline that could increase one's mental strength. Moreover, in his opinion, mental strength was an extremely limited power. According to his previous knowledge, the limit of a martial artist's mental strength was 100 steps. Therefore, it was extremely difficult to kill someone with mental strength. However, he could sense that the mental strength contained in the eternal night burning god was extremely powerful. No matter how strong one's divine sense was, they would be devoured instantly if they were caught in it. Nie Tian, do you think that the limit of mental strength is 100 steps? The Ghost Emperor seemed to have guessed what Nie Tian was thinking. He let out a strange laugh and asked, Yes. Nie Tian nodded and asked doubtfully, Can it be increased after the mental strength exceeds 100 steps? Chapter 33:42. Chapter 3:37. The limits of spirit is the limit of spirit not 100 steps? Nie Tian was stunned by the Ghost Emperor's question. He hadn't paid much attention to spirit power. After all, he had given up on alchemy and formations after reaching the deity realm and focused on martial and swordsmanship. However, the limit of spirit power he knew in the plane of existence was 100 steps. 100 steps is the limit of spirit power. That's only the understanding of spirit realm cultivators. The Ghost Emperor laughed and said, In different worlds, the martial artist's understanding of the martial Tao is completely different. For example, A spirit realm cultivator believes that the limit of martial Tao is the deity realm, but a deity realm cultivator believes that the limit of martial Tao is the sage realm. As for sage realm cultivators, they have a different understanding of the limits of martial Tao. It's the same with spirit power. Due to the limitations of the world, the limit of a spirit realm cultivator is 100 step. This leads to spirit realm cultivators believing that the limit of spirit power is only 100 step. So that's how it is. Nye Tian came to a realization and asked, "Then what's the limit of spirit power?" The Ghost Emperor frowned and said, "In the realms, the unit of mental power is trillions. 1 trillion is equivalent to 10 levels of mental power, and the limit of the martial practitioners in the realms is about 100 trillion. In the holy world, the unit of spirit power is ancient. 1 ancient is equivalent to 10 trillion, or 100 steps of spirit power. The limit of a realm cultivator is around 100 ancient. As for the limit of spirit power, this emperor's current understanding is 100 ancient. 100 ancient. Nye Tian's eyes flickered and he murmured in shock, 1 ancient is 10 trillion, and 1 trillion is 10 steps of spirit power. The limit of a holy world cultivator's spirit power is 10,000 steps. 10,000 steps. Nye Tian's eyes narrowed, and his heart couldn't help but tremble. This number was too shocking. One had to know that in the plane of existence, a cultivator with dozens of steps of spirit power had terrifying perception. It was hard to imagine how terrifying the perception of a cultivator with 10,000 steps of spirit power would be. Nye Tian guessed that a cultivator with 10,000 steps of spirit power could probably cover a large mountain range with their divine sense. Nye Tian, do you know how powerful the perception of a cultivator with extreme spirit power is? The Ghost Emperor's lips twitched as he asked Nye Tian. I don't know. Nye Tian shook his head and didn't say his guess. The Ghost Emperor chuckled and said, if he unleashes his psychic power to its fullest, he can sense a small realm. This. Nye Tian's eyes flickered with shock. His face stiffened and he couldn't utter a word for a long time. A small realm was at least tens of thousands of kilometers in circumference. Such a martial artist was too frightening. However, even in the saint's world, there should only be a handful of cultivators who possessed extreme mental strength. Spirit Emperor, Saint is of spirit, of soul, spirit, of spirit. Spirit, the Ghost Emperor used to be a formation master, so his spirit power should be very strong. The Ghost Emperor smiled and said, around 60. Only 60. Nye Tian frowned and couldn't help but feel disappointed. He originally thought that the Ghost Emperor's spirit power would be at least 80 or 90, if not 100. Who would have thought that it would be 60? Stinking brat, do you think having spiritual power in the 60s is easy? The Ghost Emperor became angry when he heard Nye Tian's disappointment. In the all-heaven sacred world, the number of people with spirit power above this emperor's can be counted on 2 hands. Nye Tian's expression changed slightly. He paused for a moment before frowning and saying, then you people from the saint's world are too useless. You. The Ghost Emperor was so angry that he couldn't say anything. If he had a body of flesh and blood, he would have vomited blood already. At that moment, Nye Tian's eyes suddenly flickered, and he asked excitedly, Ghost Emperor, what's the grade of my psychic power now? He felt that as his strength increased, his spirit power should have become stronger as well. His perception was also very strong. Therefore, he really wanted to know how much spirit power he had right now. It should be around 40 trillion. The Ghost Emperor calmed down a little and said in a bad mood. 40 trillion. Nye Tian's eyes flickered with excitement. He didn't expect his spirit power to be so strong. He had never cultivated spirit power after reaching the godly realm, so it was indeed unexpected that he could have 40 trillion spirit power. It's indeed rare for you to have 40 trillion spirit power without cultivating. The Ghost Emperor calmed down and said, normally, Even if a cultivator doesn't cultivate spirit power, their spirit power will slowly increase as their strength increases. Therefore, most godly realm cultivators have 10 to 20 trillion spirit power. And you, when you were at the soul realm, you focused on cultivating spirit power and fused with the holographic divine glyph. With the addition of the star energy in your body, your spirit power has greatly increased. Also, your eyes have great perception, which also stimulated the growth of your spirit power. That's why you have 20 trillion spirit power. No wonder I feel that my perception is much stronger than when I was at the soul realm. When my divine sense is completely spread out, I can clearly sense everything within 100,000 meters. Nie Tion's lips curled up into a smile. Your spirit power is nothing in front of a true spirit master. The Ghost Emperor curled his lips and sneered. All right. Nie Tion smiled helplessly. He then thought of something and said, Ghost Emperor, you said that the eternal night burning god is the key to helping Jiu Qianxing recover his divine sense. What do you mean? The Ghost Emperor frowned and asked, Nie Tion, you saw so many swordsmen in the secret chamber. All of them died and their divine senses were devoured. Where do you think their divine sense went? The Ghost Emperor asked with a frown. Nie Tion went blank for a moment, confusion filling his face. Wasn't their soul awareness devoured by the ghost-burning curse? What about the soul-burning ghost curse? The Ghost Emperor asked with a strange laugh. Nie Tion's eyes narrowed as he thought of something. His expression changed as he blurted out in shock. Could it be that the eternal night-burning god absorbed the power of the soul-burning ghost curse? The skeletons and the power of the god-burning ghost curse that Nie Tion had seen in the underground dungeon were all gone. He didn't pay much attention to it before, but now that he thought about it, it was even stranger. Someone had used the soul-burning ghost curse to devour the divine sense of the swordsman. There must be a reason. When he thought about the altar where he found the eternal night-burning god, Nie Tion realized that the power of the soul-burning ghost curse had been absorbed by the eternal night-burning god. Yes. The Ghost Emperor nodded and said, the divine sense of the dead swordsman was absorbed by the soul-burning ghost curse, and the soul-burning ghost curse was used to nourish the eternal night-burning god. This. Nie Tion was shocked. He was stunned for a moment before he reacted and asked with a trembling voice, what is the person behind this doing? Using so many soul-burning ghost curses to nourish the eternal night-burning god, the person behind this must have an ulterior motive. Chapter 33:43. Binding technique with blood. Nie Tion stared blankly for a few seconds before he came to his senses and asked in astonishment, Eternal night-burning god? Resurrection? He did not understand what the Ghost Emperor meant by resurrecting the eternal night-burning god. The eternal night-burning god is the heart of the eternal night demon fox. The Ghost Emperor's eyes trembled as he said, Legend has it that the 9 great primordial demon beasts are immortal. The eternal night demon fox with the bloodline of the burning god might have perished, but its heart was preserved. In ancient times, an expert predicted that the eternal night demon fox could be resurrected with the help of the eternal night-burning god's heart. This. Nie Tion frowned. He was stunned and could not speak for a long time. It was unbelievable that a powerful beast could be resurrected with the help of its own heart. Nie Tion, I know it's hard for you to accept this, the Ghost Emperor continued. The Ghost Emperor continued, Before this emperor also thought that it was impossible. I even thought that the 9 great ancient beasts were just a myth. Perhaps they didn't even exist. However, the eternal night-burning god is an undeniable fact. The Ghost Emperor's eyes trembled as he spoke, as if he was thinking about something else. He had a strange look on his face. Then how can I use the eternal night-burning god to restore Jiu Qianxing's consciousness? Nie Tion asked after he calmed down. The consciousness that the eternal night-burning god devours won't disappear immediately. It will exist in the eternal night-burning god for a long time. The Ghost Emperor's eyes sank as he said, Jiu Qianxing's consciousness was devoured not long ago. It should be perfectly preserved in the eternal night burning God. As long as you can extract his consciousness from the eternal night burning God and guide it back into his soul, he will be able to recover. Nie Tian's eyes trembled when he heard the Ghost Emperor's words. His expression became extremely unsightly. He had personally experienced the power of the eternal night burning God twice. His consciousness had almost collapsed. The Ghost Emperor wanted him to extract Jiu Qianxing's divine sense from the eternal night burning God. Was this a joke? With Nie Tian's measly 40 trillion spiritual force, once he entered the eternal night burning God, his divine sense would be instantly devoured. How could he talk about stripping Jiu Qianxing's divine sense? Nie Tian, if you want your divine sense to safely enter the eternal night burning God, you must first become the master of the eternal night burning God, the Ghost Emperor said solemnly, his eyes shining with a blazing light. Become the master of the eternal night burning God. Nie Tian's eyes trembled and his expression froze. Yes. The Ghost Emperor nodded heavily and said, Bind it with your blood. Ghost Emperor, are you saying that I should nourish the eternal night burning God with my blood and make it recognize me as its master? Nie Tian's eyes trembled, and his voice was filled with excitement. Yes. Ghost Monarch nodded with a strange light surging in his eyes. The eternal night burning God has been asleep for a very long time. A powerful bloodline is needed to awaken it, and your bloodline power should be able to awaken the eternal night burning God. As long as you can awaken the eternal night burning God, it is equivalent to using your bloodline power to set up a bloodline restriction on the eternal night burning God. The eternal night burning God must recognize you as its master. Nie Tian's eyes trembled, and his expression froze for a moment. The resurrection of the eternal night burning God meant that the eternal night demon fox had resurrected. The eternal night demon fox was one of the legendary 9 great demon beasts of the ancient times. Its power was unimaginable. Could Nie Tian really control such a terrifying demon beast? Nie Tian, the eternal night demon fox, is one of the 9 great demon beasts. It is worth a try, the Ghost Emperor said with a blazing gaze. It was obvious that he was egging Nie Tian on. Okay. Nie Tian's eyes trembled, but he did not hesitate and nodded heavily. He wanted the eternal night burning God to recognize him as its master, not because of the eternal night demon fox's power, but because he had to help Jiu Qianxing recover his divine sense. For Jiu Qianxing, he was willing to try. Brother Nie, what are you trying to do? Mo Qianjun could not help but ask when he saw Nie Tian's expression change several times and the blazing gaze in his eyes. Jiu Qianxing's divine sense is trapped in this mysterious black stone. Nie Tian looked at the eternal night burning God and said, If you want to help Jiu Qianxing recover his divine sense, you have to start with this mysterious black stone. Mo Qianjun was stunned when he heard Nie Tian's words. He could not react in time. Brother Mo, take Jiu Qianxing away from the valley first. I have something to do. Nie Tian did not explain too much to Mo Qianjun. He asked him to take Jiu Qianxing away first. He did not know what was going to happen next. Given how terrifying the eternal night burning God was, if it unleashed a powerful mental attack, Mo Qianjun's divine sense would instantly collapse. Mo Qianjun was confused, but he did not ask too much. He took Jiu Qianxing away for the time being. Nie Tian sensed that Mo Qianjun and Mo Qianjun were far enough away. He took a deep breath and moved his finger. A drop of blood spurted out from his fingertip and landed on the eternal night burning God. The drop of blood was instantly absorbed by the eternal night burning God. Nie Tian's eyes trembled. He guarded his mind and was so nervous that beads of sweat appeared on his forehead. However, nothing happened to the eternal night burning God even after he waited for a long time. Nie Tian was stunned. He murmured, Is it because my bloodline power is not strong enough? Let's try again. Then, he let out a long breath to calm himself down. Another drop of blood dripped from his fingertip and entered the eternal night-burning god. However, the eternal night-burning god still did not move. It doesn't seem to work. Nie Tian shook his head. His expression was ugly. He had thought that something terrible would happen next. Who knew that his bloodline power was not strong enough to awaken the eternal night-burning god? I'll have to think of something else. After a long time, Nie Tian sighed and prepared to put away the eternal night-burning god. Nie Tian, try using the blood from your eyes. The Ghost Emperor did not give up and reminded Nie Tian. Nie Tian was stunned for a moment, but he immediately understood what the Ghost Emperor meant. Nie Tian's strongest bloodline power was the God-fiend nascent embryo. Right now, the only things that had awakened in his body were his eyes. His right eye was the demon eye, and his left eye was the heavenly punishment godly reverse. Therefore, the strongest part of his blood that contained bloodline power was his eyes. Without the slightest hesitation, 2 drops of blood-colored tears rolled down his cheeks and fell into the eternal night-burning god. However, the eternal night-burning god still did not move after the 2 drops of blood fell. It was as if the eternal night-burning god was just an ordinary rock. There was nothing special about it. It still doesn't work. Nie Tian shook his head. He could not hide the disappointment on his face. Even his bloodline power could not awaken the eternal night-burning god. He did not know what kind of bloodline could awaken the eternal night-burning god. The god-fiend nascent embryo is the #1 forbidden bloodline. Why can't it awaken the eternal night-burning god? The Ghost Emperor was confused, but there was more disappointment in his eyes. The eternal night demon fox was one of the supreme ancient 9 monsters. It was a pity that it could not be awakened. Perhaps Nie Tian is not strong enough and cannot use the bloodline power to its fullest. The Ghost Emperor sighed and guessed. Nie Tian had a helpless expression and prepared to put away the eternal night-burning god. Crack! But at this moment, above the eternal night-burning god, a crisp sound rang out. It was extremely strange. Chapter 33:44. Chapter 339. Demon Fox of Eternal Night. Nie Tian's pupils shrank involuntarily as he saw a crack appear on the eternal night-burning god, and his nerves instantly tensed up. Pa! Following that, another crisp sound rang out, and the tiny crack on the eternal night-burning god expanded slightly. This! Nie Tian exclaimed in shock, and his face became lifeless. He did not dare to probe the eternal night-flaming god with his divine sense, but he could sense that the eternal night-flaming god was releasing a powerful aura of life. That's right, it was the aura of life. It was as if a life was being nurtured inside the eternal night-flaming god, and it was a life with extremely strong vitality. Nie Tian continued to nourish the eternal night-flaming god with the blood of the eyes. The Ghost Emperor's excited voice rang out. He was practically shouting at Nie Tian. Nie Tian answered. Then, drops of bloody tears flowed out of his eyes and dropped into the eternal night-flaming god. Pa! Pa! Crack! The eternal night-flaming god absorbed the blood of the demon eye and heavenly punishment. A series of crisp sounds rang out as tiny cracks appeared on the surface of the eternal night-flaming god. Nie Tian felt an even stronger aura of life. His eyes trembled uncontrollably. His heart was in his throat. He was extremely nervous. At this moment, eternal night-burning god was like a cracked egg. As for what would appear when the egg broke, no one knew. However, although the cracks had appeared on the eternal night-flaming god, they were very small and not enough to cause it to crack open. However, the little fellow inside seemed to be unable to wait any longer. It was continuously releasing bursts of tremendous life aura. The powerful aura of life circulated in the air, causing the space around it to tremble slightly. It was extremely terrifying. Nie Tian frowned. Blood continued to flow out of his eyes as it entered the eternal night flaming god. A moment later, bean-sized beads of sweat appeared on his forehead, and his face became much paler. He did not expect the palm-sized eternal night flaming god to absorb so much blood. It was as if the eternal night flaming god was an endless abyss of blood. Crack, crack, crack. Following that, cracks continuously appeared on the eternal night-burning god, but it did not split open. Nietion's eyes trembled as anxiety filled his heart. After losing too much blood, his eyesight was already somewhat blurry. If the eternal night-burning god continued to absorb his blood, he would truly run out of blood. Nietion, don't worry. You must hold on. The Ghost Emperor knew that Nietion was anxious and reminded him. Although he said that, he was actually more anxious than Nietion. But since they had already come this far, they absolutely could not give up halfway. Nietion nodded his head heavily. His eyes were filled with determination. Bang! At that instant, a dull thud could be heard. A gap appeared on the eternal night blazing god, and a tremendous life aura was emitted from it. Nietion's eyes trembled, and he looked extremely shocked. He had only sensed such a boundless life force in the star origin stone before it was unsealed. Bang! The enormous aura of life formed an invisible ripple in the air, surging out in all directions, instantly spreading throughout the entire clear sky sword martial technique. At this moment, the expressions of all the swordsmen in the clear sky sword martial technique turned sluggish, and their expressions changed. They were dumbfounded, as if they were in some kind of illusion. Bang! 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 At the same time, more gaps appeared on the eternal night blazing god. Finally, they connected into a slightly larger gap. Nietion looked at the gap. What he saw caused his eyes to tremble, and his entire body froze. From the gap, a small furry paw reached out. It was very small, about the size of a normal person's finger. Furthermore, the furry paw was golden in color. It was eye-catching, and it made one feel like they were in a bright atmosphere. Puff! While Nietion was still in a daze, another furry little paw reached out. Following that, a small head appeared. It looked very similar to a fox, but its ears were very big, and it looked extremely cute. The moment the furry little beast came out, the first thing it saw was Nietion's shocked expression. Its emerald eyes twinkled, and its little head shook, as if it was observing Nietion. Gulp! Nietion took a long time to react. He could not help but gulp, and his face was still a little dazed. He murmured, "This is the Eternal Night Demon Fox?" The Eternal Night Demon Fox, one of the legendary 9 great primordial demonic beasts, was actually such a terrifying little fox? Nietion could not connect the little thing in front of him with the 9 great primordial demonic beasts. Squeak! At that moment, the little thing cried out, and a red light flashed in its eyes. Then, it leaped, and like a golden bolt of lightning, it directly landed on Nietion's face. The little thing's entire body was about the size of a child's fist. Its furry little paw was soft, and it firmly clasped onto Nietion's face. Then, the little thing's little paw came out, and like a finger, it scratched Nietion's face back and forth. It even stuck out its tongue from time to time, licking Nietion's face until it was burning hot. Nietion frowned, and then he could not help but laugh. He had worked hard for half a day. Could it be that he had gotten a little pet that only knew how to act cute? Little thing, are you really the Eternal Night Demon Fox? Nietion reached out and held the little thing in his palm, and carefully observed it. Its whole body was golden, and it looked dazzling. However, there was a tuft of scarlet hair on its forehead, like a flame, branded on its forehead. Nietion sensed a terrifying spiritual fluctuation from the scarlet hair, as if there was an abyss of spiritual power hidden under the scarlet hair. Nietion, this is really the Eternal Night Demon Fox, and it's a newborn cub. It can accompany you and grow together. The Ghost Emperor's voice sounded, and it was trembling slightly, but it was barely able to maintain its composure. He did not expect that the eternal night-burning god would give birth to a cub. Could this be how the eternal night demon fox maintained its immortality? It was reborn again and reincarnated without dying. This. Nyetian frowned, and his expression was a little ugly. He did not have time to wait for the eternal night demon fox to grow up. He still needed the eternal night demon fox to recover its 9,000 years of divine sense. Squeak! Squeak! At this time, the eternal night demon fox began to cry, as if it had sensed something. Its little face looked aggrieved, and its green eyes stared at Nyetian, looking delicate and pitiful. What's going on? Nyetian was stunned. He did not understand why the eternal night demon fox had suddenly cried out. Cough, cough. At this time, the ghost emperor coughed and said, Nyetian, it might be hungry. Hungry? Nyetian was taken aback for a moment, and his face darkened. The eternal night demon fox had just been born, and it had not done anything yet, and it was already hungry? What does it want to eat? Nyetian became cold and asked with a frown. The ghost emperor smiled bitterly and said, Right now, the nine-tailed demon fox is still in the infant stage. It can only eat to awaken its power, which is your blood. You want me to feed it with my blood? Nyetian's expression darkened, and he looked at the eternal night demon fox and cried out. If you want it to live, you have to do this first. The ghost emperor looked helpless, and then his eyes flickered. He suddenly said, Take out the scroll of the 3 talents sword formation and test the little demon fox's ability. Nyetian was confused, but he still took out the sword formation scroll and placed it in front of the little demon fox. The little demon fox's eyes flickered, like a child who had found a new toy. It temporarily forgot about its hunger, and reached out with its little claws to touch the sword formation scroll. At this time, a strange scene happened. Chapter 33:45. Sword Array Trial. The sudden scene caused Nyetian to be abruptly stunned. His expression froze and he couldn't react for a long time. Why did the image of the entire sword array appear in his divine sense when the little demon fox touched the sword array scroll? What was going on? What powerful senses! The ghost emperor's face sank and he couldn't help but let out a cry of astonishment. Ghost Emperor, why did a sword formation appear in my divine sense? Nyetian became cold and asked the Ghost Emperor. It's simple. The Ghost Emperor seemed a little excited and said proudly, The little demon fox was awakened by your bloodline power, which means you left a bloodline imprint in its body. It's like a soul contract. Your souls can resonate, which means that your souls are connected. To put it simply, whatever it perceives can directly appear in your consciousness. I think I understand now. Before the Ghost Emperor could finish, Nyetian's eyes flickered as he said, So you're saying that the image of the sword formation in my soul awareness was sensed by the eternal night fox, and that I'm connected to its soul? That's why it sensed the sword formation in my soul awareness. Really? And the Ghost Emperor nodded and said, You should know how terrifying this little demon fox is now. It didn't even open the scroll. Just by touching it, it could sense the sword array in the scroll. Such perception is comparable to those saint formation masters in the sacred world. Indeed. Nyetian gulped and couldn't help but nod. The tripartite sword formation was very complicated. Although it had evolved from the tripartite sacred formation, it was definitely a high-level god formation. The little fox immediately sensed the structure of the array. It was indeed terrifying. Most importantly, the little demon fox had just been born. Its current sensory ability was definitely not its limit. Yeah. Just as Nyetian was in a state of shock, the little demon fox started to get tired of the sword array scroll. She turned to look at him and started to cry out. Nyetian frowned and smiled wryly. Without hesitation, blood spurted out of his fingertip and the little demon fox started to suck. After a while, the little demon fox's belly was full. It finally stopped, stretched, and fell asleep on Nyetian's palm. Nie Tian looked at the sleeping little demonic fox and couldn't help but laugh. This little fellow is quite cheerful. It sleeps after eating. Then, Nie Tian took a deep breath and activated his divine sense to sense the eternal night demon fox's divine soul. His divine sense was connected with the eternal night demon fox's, so he didn't have to worry about it. He found that the eternal night demonic fox's spirit space was very vast, like a vast ocean. In this vast spirit space, only a very small part of the space was bright. The rest of the space was dark and chaotic. He wanted to find the 9 Qianxing's Jiu soul. After a while, Nie Tian was covered in cold sweat. He had to withdraw his divine soul. Nie Tian, don't be too anxious. Jiu Qianxing's divine soul is only buried in the little demon fox's divine soul. You have to get used to the little demon fox's divine soul first before you can enter the divine soul. The Ghost Emperor knew what Nie Tian was thinking and said in a low voice, "Yes." Nie Tian nodded. That was the only thing he could do now. Nie Tian, what happened here? At this time, Mo Qianjun came back with Jiu Qianxing. He looked at Nie Tian in confusion. His eyes were dull and he looked very tired. Nothing. Nie Tian smiled and asked, "Brother Mo, are you okay?" "I'm fine." Mo Qianjun shook his head. He felt a little dizzy and said, "I don't know what happened just now. It seems that I lost a part of my memory." Nie Tian's eyebrows furrowed as he speculated that the eternal night fox's life fluctuations, which carried psychic impacts, must have affected Mo Qianjuan's soul awareness to some extent. In fact, it wasn't just Jiu Qianxing. All the swordsmen in the sky fell into an environment when the eternal night fox was born. Just now, everyone came to their senses, but they couldn't remember what had happened. Then, Nie Tian briefly explained what had happened to Jiu Qianxing. Finally, he said, "Brother Mo, I'll have to trouble you to take care of Jiu Qianxing for the time being. I'll find his soul awareness as soon as possible." "Yes." Mo Qianjun nodded and didn't say anything else. There was still a long time before the opening of the sword seal in the sky. Nie Tian planned to use this time to comprehend the 3 greats' sword formation and improve his understanding and control of the sword will. His current level of sword principle had reached a bottleneck. It would be difficult for him to improve it in a short time. Therefore, the way to improve his strength was to strengthen his understanding of the sword will. Sixth Sky was able to defeat Nie Tian in the state of Transcendence Ultimacy with his Transcendence Sword Soul. This showed the importance of understanding the sword will to a swordsman. As long as Nie Tian's understanding and control of the sword will could improve, he would be able to easily fight against swordsmen with sword charm. Nie Tian opened the scroll of the 3 greats' sword formation and released a huge sword formation that instantly covered the entire valley. Next, he and Mo Qianjun stayed in the sword formation to comprehend, practice, and continuously hone their sword will. In the blink of an eye, more than 20 days had passed. In the middle of the valley, 2 figures were floating in the air, emanating fierce sword intent. They were Nie Tian and Mo Qianjun. At this moment, the 2 of them were competing in sword will. After more than 20 days of cultivation, Mo Qianjuan's sword principle had broken through to the Transcendence Ultimacy realm, which was 1 realm higher than Nie Tian's. However, his martial arts cultivation was still at the rank 5 pseudo-sage realm. Mo Qianjun had been stuck in the Transcendence sword body for a long time. This time, he was able to break through thanks to the 3 greats' sword formation. "Brother Mo, make your move." Nie Tian looked at Mo Qianjun and said with a faint smile. Although his sword principle realm did not improve, his understanding of sword will had greatly improved. He was confident that he could use the sword will of the Transcendence sword body to fight against Mo Qianjuan's Transcendence Ultimacy sword will. "All right, then I won't stand on ceremony." The corner of Mo Qianjuan's mouth twitched slightly. Then, he moved and slashed across the sky with the infinite sky. An extreme sword will appeared and whistled in the air, attacking Nyetian. Nyetian's eyes narrowed slightly and he also stabbed out with his sword. Bang! In the void, the two sword wills collided and shattered at the same time. Nyetian and Emo Qianjun took a few steps back at the same time and then stabilized themselves at the same time. Emo Qianjun put away his long sword and couldn't help but smile bitterly. I lost. He used the Transcendence Ultimacy to compete with Nyetian's Transcendence sword body. He had the advantage in the first place, but the result was a draw, which was equivalent to losing. Moreover, he knew that Nyetian had not used his full strength at all. He had been holding on to his sword will. Brother Emo, your sword intent isn't weak. It's just that you still need to comprehend more about it. Nyetian smiled and nodded. Don't worry, I won't let you leave me too far behind. Emo Qianjun laughed heartily and said loudly. He was shocked by Nyetian's growth, but he would not belittle himself. Instead, he would catch up. Yeah. Nyetian smiled and nodded. Then, he heard the demon fox of eternal night call out. Chapter 33:46. The opening in the sky. This is the scene that the little demon fox sensed. Nyetian's eyes trembled as he saw the shadow of the giant sword in his divine sense becoming clearer and clearer, as if it was really descending. In the next moment, he suddenly turned around and saw the shadow of a giant sword appear high up in the sky. It actually directly tore through the void and released a tremendous amount of sword chi, forming a violent wave of air in the sky. It was extremely terrifying, crashing into the void. This scene was like a giant hidden in the void suddenly falling down with a giant sword, tearing the sky apart. The boundless and majestic sword intent released a terrifying aura, causing one to feel a suffocating sense of oppression. The giant sword was the color of blood. The moment it fell, it seemed as if the sky had been torn open. The crimson sword will filled the sky and dyed the earth red, like the sunset. The swordsmen in the sky raised their heads and looked at the sky. The shock in their hearts was indescribable. Their eyes were trembling in disbelief and disbelief. The crimson shadow of the sword was an existence that shocked the heavens and earth. Under the pressure of the enormous sword will, even the heavens and earth seemed to become small. In the valley, Emo Qianjun looked at the crimson shadow of the sword with a dull expression. His mouth was wide open but he could not make a sound. One could imagine the shock in his heart. Nyetian's face was stiff. After a long time, he finally reacted and murmured, "Is this the sword seal in the sky?" At this moment, the crowd also reacted and began to discuss. So the legendary sword seal in the sky is actually so powerful. Oh my God, I can't believe I can see the sword seal in the sky. Even if I die, it will be worth it. The aura of the sword seal in the sky is so strong. How much sword will is contained in the sword seal? The crowd was shocked. They were very glad that they could see the sword seal in the sky. Such a powerful sword seal, such an enormous sword will. As a swordsman, it was hard to imagine the shock in his heart when he saw it with his own eyes. The crimson shadow of the sword that broke through the sky was the sword seal in the sky. Buzz. At this time, the sword seal in the sky slowly descended, and finally floated in the air, emitting a sonorous sword cry, like the cry of a crane, the sound of a great bell, surging in the void, lasting for a long time. At this moment, everyone felt that the sword will within their bodies was actually leaping about, as if it had been stimulated or resonated with something. I broke through. A moment later, a voice suddenly rang out. A swordsman shouted like a madman. He was very excited because his sword Dao realm had actually broken through. I also broke through. I also broke through. Following that, more and more excited voices rang out. The crowd seemed to have gone crazy, falling into a kind of carnival. Most of the swordsmen in the sky sword martial artists had been stimulated by the sword seal in the sky and achieved a breakthrough in their sword principles. Only an extremely small number of people, although the sword intent within their bodies was active, did not increase their cultivation level. Unfortunately, both Nie Tian and Mo Qianjun belonged to this minority. Nie Tian's sword will was too strong, and the stimulation of the sword seal in the sky was not enough for him to break through. As for Mo Qianjun, he had just broken through not long ago, and was in the transition between the ultimacy of transcendence to the sword principles of the sage realm. This was the biggest bottleneck for a swordsman, so it was normal that he could not break through. On the other hand, Jiu Qianxing, who was below, had a miraculous breakthrough. There was a trace of light in his dull eyes. Nie Tian did not pay attention to the others. His eyes were shining as he stared at the sword seal in the sky with a burning gaze. The sword shadow in the sky hung in the void. It was as red as blood, and it was dazzling. The divine sword was tens of thousands of meters long, and it stood there like a pillar of blood that reached the sky. Outside the sword seal in the sky, there was a layer of mysterious power that flowed like blood-colored runes, constantly surging and releasing waves of sword aura. Nie Tian only looked at the sword seal in the sky, and he felt the sword will in his body become active, making him extremely excited, and his blood was boiling. It was unimaginable how much sword will was contained in the sword seal in the sky. He did not know what the sword seal in the sky was, nor did he know what it meant for the swordsman in the sky. However, from the fanatical looks on everyone's faces, it seemed that the sword seal in the sky was something very terrifying. At this moment, everyone soared into the sky one after another and flew towards the sky. Soon, a large number of swordsmen gathered under the sword seal in the sky. Everyone looked at the sword seal in the sky and felt the aura of the sword seal at close range. They were even more shocked. However, most of them knew that they could only watch. Only an extremely small number of people could actually enter the sword seal in the sky. Brother Mo, take Jiu Qianxing with you. Let's go and take a look. Nie Tian frowned slightly and said with a faint smile, "All right." Mo Qianjun agreed and waved at Jiu Qianxing. The latter moved and came to his side. During this period of time, Mo Qianjun and Jiu Qianxing had established a tacit understanding. Therefore, even though Jiu Qianxing's divine consciousness had not recovered, he still trusted Mo Qianjun. Nie Tian and the other two quickly arrived in the sky. They were able to observe the sword seal in the sky at close range. When the others saw Jiu Qianxing's appearance, they all avoided him. They all looked very disgusted. However, they seemed to be in awe of Nie Tian. From time to time, they glanced at Nie Tian with undisguised fear. Nie Tian did not care about them. He used his divine consciousness to feel the sword seal in the sky. He was even more shocked. Not only was the sword seal in the sky powerful, but it also seemed to have the aura of time and space. This meant that the sword seal in the sky had formed a world of its own. However, Nie Tian's mind power was limited. He could not sense what was inside the sword seal. He wanted the little fox demon to sense it, but the little fellow did not want to. Instead, her big eyes were shining. She seemed to be very interested in the swordsman in front of her. Although more than 20 days had passed, Nie Tian still had not found a suitable way to communicate with the little fox demon. What surprised him was that after such a long time, the little fox demon's body size had not grown at all. It was still the size of a small fist. It was very small. Nie Tian was even worried that the Evernight demonic fox would maintain such a large body size. Ah! At this moment, the little fox demon seemed to have sensed something and let out a strange cry. Nie Tian sensed something, and turned around to look into the distance. What entered his sight were the figures of dozens of incomparably fierce swordsmen. These swordsmen looked very young, but they had a sharp aura. The weakest among them had reached the realm of the ultimate sword body. The stronger ones had reached the realm of sword rhyme. Nie Tian frowned. He could not help but feel strange. He did not know that there was such a group of young swordsmen in the sky sword martialists. They are the Sword Star. Mo Qianjun could not help but say when he saw these people. Sword Star. Nie Tian was stunned. He did not know what this name meant in the Sky Sword Martialist.